The rifle's crack split the Montana dawn, and Tabitha Wilson didn't flinch. She'd buried her father 3 months ago, inherited his land, and with it, every man's assumption that she'd fail. Jasper Holloway wanted her ranch, wanted her broken, desperate, gone. But she stood her ground, barrel smoking, while his hired guns scattered like crows. She didn't know the stranger watching from the ridge would change everything. She didn't know he carried secrets darker than the coming storm. Stay with me until the end of this story, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The wind came hard across the Montana grasslands that morning, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Tabitha Wilson stood on the porch of the Wilson Ranch homestead, her father's Winchester resting easy in the crook of her arm like it had grown there. 3 months. 3 months since they'd lowered Thomas Wilson into the hard ground, since the preacher had spoken words that meant nothing, since every rancher and shopkeeper in Bitterroot Valley had started the whispered countdown to her failure. She was 26 years old, unmarried, and according to every man within 100 miles, hopelessly out of her depth. They could all go to hell. The fence line stretched before her in the early light, posts her father had set with his own hands, wire he'd strung with her help since she was tall enough to hold the stretcher. Beyond it, the land rolled in waves of gold and green toward the mountains, 2,000 acres of the most beautiful country God ever made. Her country now. Her responsibility. Her fight. Miss Wilson. She turned to find Caleb, her only remaining ranch hand, approaching from the barn. He was pushing 60, weathered as old leather, and one of the few men who'd stayed after her father died. The others had drifted off within weeks, unwilling to take orders from a woman, no matter how well she paid or how much she knew about cattle and horses. "Fences are holding on the South Range," he reported, pulling off his hat. "But we're going to need more hands come roundup time. Can't work 2,000 acres with just the two of us and Billy." Billy was Caleb's nephew, barely 16 and green as spring grass, but willing. It still wasn't enough. "I know," Tabitha said. "I've been into town twice this week looking for men. They hear a woman's doing the hiring, they suddenly remember other obligations." Caleb's jaw tightened. "It ain't right." "Right's got nothing to do with it." She checked the rifle's load out of habit, thumbing the cartridges. "How's the water situation?" "Creek's running good, but someone cut the fence on the west section again last night. Cattle scattered halfway to the ridge before Billy found the gap." Tabitha's hand stilled on the rifle. "Same place as before?" "Yep, right where our land borders Holloway's grazing lease." There it was. The name that had hung over everything since her father's death like a circling vulture. Jasper Holloway, son of Edmund Holloway, who owned the Bitterroot Valley Bank and half the businesses in town. Jasper, who'd made 3 offers for her land in 3 months, each one delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and numbers that were barely above insulting. The last time, 2 weeks ago, the smile had disappeared entirely. "You're making a mistake, Miss Wilson," he'd said, standing in her yard like he owned it already. "A woman alone can't run this place. It's not a question of if you'll fail, but when. And when you do, I'll be here. But my price will be considerably lower." She told him to get off her property. He'd tipped his hat and ridden away, but something in his eyes had promised this wasn't finished. "He's testing us," Tabitha said now, her voice hard. "Seeing what we'll tolerate." "Want me to ride over there? Have a word?" "No." She knew what a word would turn into, and Caleb was too old for that kind of trouble. "We fix the fence and watch it closer. He wants to escalate. Let him make the first real move." "Miss Tabitha." "That's the end of it, Caleb." He nodded, but the worry didn't leave his face. "Your father wouldn't want you dealing with this alone." "My father taught me to handle my own problems." She softened slightly. "But I appreciate the concern. Now let's get that fence repaired before we lose any more cattle." She spent the morning riding fence line, her horse picking its way carefully along the rocky terrain while she examined every post and wire. The cut section was obvious, clean slices through the wire, done with intent. Holloway's work, or men he'd paid. It was small-scale harassment now, but it could grow worse. She'd heard stories of other lone ranchers being driven off their land through escalating accidents and pressure. By noon, she'd repaired the fence and was heading back toward the house when she saw the rider. He came from the north, following the main road that wound up from town. Even at a distance, she could tell he was a stranger, something in the way he sat his horse, the careful pace, the way his eyes seemed to track across the landscape with methodical attention. Tabitha's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle in her saddle scabbard, then stopped. Broad daylight, open ground. If he meant trouble, he was going about it the wrong way. Still, she altered her course to intercept him, making sure she had the high ground and the sun at her back. The stranger saw her coming and reined in, waiting. As she drew closer, she took his measure. Tall, lean, maybe 30 or a few years past it. Dark hair that needed cutting. Blue eyes that watched her with what seemed like equal parts caution and curiosity. His clothes were worn but well maintained, his horse was good quality, and there was a confidence in how he carried himself that spoke of experience. Not a drifter. Something more. "You're on Wilson land," she called when she was close enough. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was low, roughened by wind and distance. "That would be you, I take it?" "It would." "What's your business here?" "Looking for work." He nodded toward the south range. "Saw your herd from the ridge. Fine cattle, but you look light on hands for a spread this size." Direct. She appreciated that, even as she kept her guard up. "What makes you think I'm hiring?" 2,000 acres, prime grazing, one man old enough to be drawing a pension, and a kid who's still learning which end of a horse kicks. He said it without judgment, just observation. "You're hiring, or you should be." Tabitha felt a spark of irritation at his presumption, mixed with grudging respect for his accuracy. "You know cattle?" "Born to it. Worked ranches from Texas to Wyoming. Can break horses, repair tack, handle a branding iron, can read and write, if bookkeeping needs doing. Can shoot, if that becomes necessary." He paused. "Name's Flynn Garrett." "That's supposed to mean something to me?" "No, ma'am, just a name." But something flickered in his eyes, too quick to read. She studied him in silence. She needed hands desperately. Roundup was 6 weeks away, and with just Caleb and Billy, it would be impossible. This man looked capable, spoke intelligently, and wasn't bothered by the fact that she'd be his boss. Those were 3 things she couldn't afford to dismiss lightly. But she'd learned to trust her instincts, and those instincts were sending mixed signals. Everything about Flynn Garrett seemed straightforward, but there was something underneath, a careful quality to his words, a watchfulness that went beyond normal caution. "Where'd you work last?" she asked. "Cattle outfit outside of Laramie. 6 months. Before that, various places." "Why'd you leave Laramie?" "Contract work. Time was up, so I moved on." "References?" "Left them in Laramie. Can wire for them if you need." That would take weeks. She didn't have weeks. "You understand I'm the boss here," she said flatly. "My ranch, my rules, my decisions. You got a problem taking orders from a woman? Ride on now and save us both the trouble." Something that might have been approval crossed his face. "Yes, ma'am. Wouldn't be here if that was a problem." 30 a month and found, she said, naming a fair wage. "You bunk in the ranch house with Caleb and Billy. Meals included. You pull your weight, you keep your job. You don't, you're gone. Clear?" "Clear." "When can you start?" "Right now, if you need." She needed. God, did she need. But caution made her add, "You carrying?" He opened his coat carefully, showing a Colt 45 on his hip, worn but well maintained. "Usually. Dangerous country for going unarmed." "It is. But we're not running a war here, Mr. Garrett. That stays holstered unless I say different or you're hunting for the pot. Understood?" "Understood." Tabitha made her decision, hoping it was the right one. "Follow me down to the house. I'll introduce you to Caleb, and he'll show you where you're bunking. We start at dawn." "Thank you, Miss Wilson." "Thank me by being as good as you claim. Otherwise, this'll be a short conversation." She turned her horse without waiting for a response, setting off toward the homestead at a steady lope. Behind her, she heard Flynn Garrett fall in behind at a respectful distance. As they rode, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just set something in motion that was larger than simply hiring a ranch hand. The house came into view, solid timber and stone, built to last by her grandfather 30 years ago. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney where Caleb would be fixing the midday meal. The barn stood red and proud against the grasslands, corrals spreading around it like spokes. It was her father's legacy, her home, and she'd defend it with everything she had. "Nice spread," Flynn said as they approached. It is, pride and defensiveness mixed in her voice. And it's going to stay that way. If he caught the warning in her words, he didn't show it. They dismounted at the hitching rail, and Tabitha called toward the house. "Caleb, we've got a new hand!" The old rancher appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a cloth. His eyes went immediately to Flynn, assessment sharp and suspicious. "That's so. Flynn Garrett, meet Caleb Thompson. Caleb runs the day-to-day operations." The two men sized each other up with the particular thoroughness of men who'd be working together in dangerous conditions. Finally, Caleb stepped forward and offered his hand. "You know cattle?" "I do." "Horses?" "Them, too." "Afraid of hard work?" "Never have been," Caleb grunted, which from him was almost enthusiastic approval. "We'll see. Bunkhouse is out back. Drop your gear and come eat. Afternoon, we're moving cattle from the South Range to better water." "I'll be ready." As Flynn led his horse toward the barn, Caleb moved close to Tabitha. "You sure about this?" "No," she admitted quietly. "But we need the help. There's something about him." "I know, but there's something about him that seems solid, too. We'll watch him close." "Damn right we will." Caleb headed back to the kitchen, muttering under his breath about strangers and caution. Tabitha remained in the yard, watching as Flynn unsaddled his horse with practiced efficiency, then inspected the barn with the same methodical attention he'd given the land earlier. He moved like a man used to noticing details, cataloging information. It should have reassured her. Somehow, it didn't quite. The meal was simple: beans, bacon, cornbread. But there was plenty of it, and Flynn ate with the quiet focus of a man who'd known hunger. Billy, Caleb's nephew, peppered him with questions between bites, teenage curiosity overwhelming shyness. "Where you from originally?" "Missouri, originally, but I've been west for years." "You ever fight Indians?" "Billy," Tabitha cut in sharply, "that's enough." "Sorry, ma'am, just curious." Flynn didn't seem offended. "Most Indians I've met just wanted to be left alone, same as anybody. Had a few tense moments, but nothing worth bragging about." "You been to Texas? I heard Texas ranches are huge." "Some are, but big doesn't always mean better. Quality counts more than quantity." Tabitha found herself studying him as the conversation continued. He answered Billy's questions patiently but without elaboration, never volunteering more information than asked. His table manners were better than most cow hands she'd known, suggesting either good upbringing or time spent in better circumstances than drifting ranch work usually provided. "You're not much of a talker, are you?" she observed. Flynn looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "Prefer to listen first. Learn how a place works before speaking out of turn." "Smart," Caleb admitted grudgingly. "Seen too many young bucks come in thinking they know everything. Man who thinks he knows everything usually knows the least." After the meal, they saddled up for the afternoon work. Moving cattle was hot, dusty labor, requiring patience and skill. Flynn proved himself quickly, reading the herd's movement with the intuition that couldn't be taught, positioning himself exactly where he was needed without being told. When a cantankerous steer tried to break back toward the South Range, Flynn cut him off smoothly, turning him back to the herd with minimal fuss. "He's good," Caleb admitted to Tabitha as they watched. "Real good. Maybe too good for drifting ranch work. Maybe he just likes the work. Maybe." But Caleb didn't sound convinced. By evening, they'd successfully moved 200 head to the new grazing area near the creek. The cattle were watered, settled, and the riders were exhausted. As the sun painted the mountains gold and red, they rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence. That night, after a supper of stew and more cornbread, Tabitha sat on the porch with her father's journal, recording the day's work as he'd taught her. She was aware of Flynn in the bunkhouse, visible through the open door as he organized his gear with military precision. Every possession seemed to have its exact place, everything arranged for maximum efficiency. Former soldier, she wondered. That would explain some things: the discipline, the watchfulness, the way he carried himself. "Miss Wilson?" She looked up to find him approaching, hat in hand. "Something wrong, Mr. Garrett?" "No, ma'am. Just wanted to thank you for the opportunity and to say—" He hesitated, choosing words carefully. If you're having trouble with neighbors or anyone giving you grief about running this place alone, I'm handy in more ways than just cattle. That's so. Just want you to know, some men don't like seeing a woman succeed. If they make that your problem, you've got backup. It was the longest speech she'd heard from him and the most direct. Tabitha set down her journal. I appreciate that, but I've handled trouble before. I don't doubt it. Offer stands regardless. He turned to go, but she called after him. Mr. Garrett, why'd you really come here? He stopped, and for a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was quiet. Maybe I got tired of drifting. Maybe I wanted to work for someone who'd earned their place instead of inheriting it through luck or force. Maybe, he met her eyes. I just liked the look of the land and the woman defending it. Before she could respond, he continued toward the bunkhouse, leaving her alone with the journal and a confusion of thoughts she didn't have time to untangle. The next days fell into a rhythm. Flynn proved himself repeatedly, fixing things before he was asked, anticipating problems, working dawn to dusk without complaint. He was good with horses, better with cattle, and Caleb gradually shifted from suspicious to grudgingly respectful. Still don't quite trust him, the old rancher confided to Tabitha a week after Flynn's arrival. But I can't fault his work. That's all we need from him, Tabitha replied. But it wasn't quite true, and she knew it. Flynn Garrett was becoming part of the ranch's fabric faster than any hand she'd known. Billy followed him around like a puppy, soaking up knowledge. The horses responded to him with unusual trust. Even the work itself seemed to flow more smoothly with him present. And then Jasper Holloway came calling. It was a Wednesday, 9 days after Flynn's arrival. Tabitha was in the barn checking on a mare who'd been acting colicky when she heard horses in the yard. Not the sound of friends arriving. Too many, too aggressive. She grabbed her rifle and stepped into the sunlight. 5 riders. Jasper Holloway in the lead, dressed like he was going to a church social instead of visiting a working ranch. 4 men behind him, hard-faced and armed. Not cowboys. Hired guns. Miss Wilson, Jasper called cheerfully, as if he'd brought good news. Lovely afternoon, isn't it? State your business, Holloway. Now, is that any way to greet a neighbor? He dismounted, his men staying in their saddles. I've come with a proposition. I'm not interested. Hear me out. He approached with that confident smile, stopping just close enough to be presumptuous. I've been doing some checking. Your father owed the bank money when he died. Not much, but some. And I've been reviewing the terms of that loan. That loan was paid off, Tabitha cut in. 3 days after the funeral, I have the receipt. Jasper's smile didn't waver. Do you? Because our records show otherwise. In fact, our records show escalating interest that now totals, he pulled a paper from his pocket, nearly $3,000. The world seemed to tilt. $3,000. It might as well have been $3 million. That's a lie. That's our records. He shrugged. Now, I'd hate to see you lose this place over a paperwork dispute. So I'm prepared to be generous. Sell to me now, and I'll forgive the debt entirely. You walk away with a small profit and no legal troubles. Get off my land. Miss Wilson, be reasonable. I said get off my land. She raised the rifle, not quite pointing it at him, but making her intent clear. The hired guns tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. The moment balanced on a knife edge, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. You're making a mistake, Jasper said softly, his smile finally fading. A very serious mistake. Only mistake I made was being polite this long. You've got 10 seconds to be gone, or I start shooting. And unlike your fake records, my aim is documented fact. For a moment she thought he'd push it, thought the guns would clear leather and blood would water her father's land. Then Flynn appeared from around the barn, moving with deceptive casualness, but positioning himself with clear tactical awareness. His hand rested lightly on his Colt, and something in his eyes, something cold and dangerous, made the hired guns reconsider. Who's this? Jasper demanded. New hand, Tabitha said. Mr. Garrett, meet Jasper Holloway. He was just leaving. Flynn nodded slightly, never taking his eyes off the hired guns. Seems like a good idea. The moment stretched. Then Jasper mounted his horse with deliberate slowness. This isn't over, Miss Wilson. You've got 2 weeks to reconsider before I take this to court. And trust me, you won't like how that turns out." They rode off in a cloud of dust and implied threats. Tabitha didn't lower the rifle until they disappeared from view. Then her hands started shaking. "You all right?" Flynn asked quietly. "Fine." "That was well handled." "He's lying." She turned to face him, anger and fear mixing in her voice. "That debt was paid. I have the receipt in my father's papers. This is a setup." "Probably. Men like Holloway usually have lawyers who can make numbers dance any way they want." He paused. "But you said you have the receipt?" "Yes, in the house." "Mind if I take a look?" She wanted to refuse, to keep her business private, but something in his tone, professional interest rather than nosiness, made her nod. They walked to the house together, and she retrieved the strongbox where her father had kept important papers. The receipt was there, clear as day. Payment in full to Bitterroot Valley Bank, dated 3 days after Thomas Wilson's funeral. Witnessed and stamped. Flynn studied it with an intensity that seemed excessive for a simple ranch hand. "This is legitimate," he said finally. "But if Holloway's claiming otherwise, he's either falsified bank records or there's another loan document somewhere." "There isn't. My father was meticulous about debt. He hated owing money." "Then Holloway's manufacturing this to pressure you into selling." Flynn handed back the receipt. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Fight. What else can I do?" "Could be dangerous. Man who'd forge bank records wouldn't stop at other methods of persuasion." "I know." She met his eyes. "Thank you for backing my play out there. Might have gotten ugly without you." Part of the job. But his expression suggested he was thinking about more than cattle work. "Miss Wilson, if Holloway takes this to court, even with that receipt, he might have enough influence to tie you up in legal proceedings until you run out of money for lawyers and operations." "So what do you suggest?" "Find out what he's really after. Men like that don't go through this trouble just for a ranch, even a good one. There's something else, something he knows that you don't." It was surprisingly astute analysis from a drifting cowhand. "You sound like you've dealt with this kind of thing before." "I've known men like Holloway. They're all the same, greedy and convinced their money makes them untouchable." Something hard entered his voice. "They're usually wrong." That night, Tabitha barely slept. She kept thinking about Jasper's threat, about the impossibility of fighting the bank in court, about the ranch her father had died protecting. She'd promised him in those last fevered hours before the pneumonia took him that she'd keep the land. That promise was all she had left of him. The next morning, she woke to shouting. She grabbed her rifle and ran outside in her nightdress to find Caleb pointing toward the south range. Even from the house, she could see the smoke. "Fire!" he yelled. "Someone torched the south range." They saddled horses at a dead run, Flynn emerging from the bunkhouse already dressed and armed. The ride to the burning section took 20 minutes of hard galloping, and by the time they arrived, the damage was clear. Not the grass. That would have been dangerous, but manageable. Someone had burned the line shack that served as shelter for hands working the south range. More than that, they'd driven off or scattered 50 head of cattle and cut the fence in 3 places. "Holloway," Tabitha said, her voice shaking with fury. "Likely," Flynn agreed. He was examining the ground near the burned shack. 4 riders came in from the west before dawn. Systematic. They knew exactly what they were hitting and why. "How can you tell all that from tracks?" "Spent time learning." He stood, his face grim. "This is escalation. Warning shot across your bow." "Well, he's got my attention." She stared at the smoking ruins. "This stops now." "How?" "I'm going to town. I'm going to the bank and demanding to see their records. If they're lying, I'll prove it. And if they've covered their tracks, then I'll find another way. But I won't be driven off my land through intimidation and arson." Flynn moved closer, his voice low and urgent. "Miss Wilson, Tabitha, you go into town making accusations against the Holloways, you'll be painting a target on your back. They've got the sheriff in their pocket, half the town council, and enough hired guns to make sure you don't become a problem. What's my alternative? Sit here and wait for them to burn me out completely? No. But there are smarter ways to fight." "Such as?" He hesitated, and she saw calculation behind his eyes, as if he were weighing how much to reveal. "Let me go into town," he said finally. I can ask questions without drawing the same attention. Find out what Holloway's really after, who's helping him, whether there's anyone in town who might stand with you. You've been here less than 2 weeks. Why would anyone tell you anything? Because I'm nobody, just a drifting ranch hand. Men talk around people they don't think matter. His eyes met hers. Trust me. There was that phrase again. Trust. She barely knew this man, had no real reason to believe he was anything more than he claimed. But something in how he'd handled Holloway's visit, the way he'd analyzed the fire site, suggested capabilities beyond normal ranch work. All right, she decided, but I'm coming with you. That defeats the purpose. My ranch, my fight, Mr. Garrett. We do this together or not at all. A smile ghosted across his face. Yes, ma'am. They rode for town at midday, leaving Caleb and Billy to round up the scattered cattle and start fence repairs. The road wound through grasslands and across a shallow creek before climbing toward Bitterroot, a town that had grown up around the bank and the land office and the railroad's promise of eventually pushing through to the mining camps. The town was busy with afternoon activity, freight wagons, riders, townspeople going about their business. But Tabitha felt eyes on her as they rode down Main Street. Whispers followed in their wake. The woman who thought she could run a ranch. The Wilson girl who wouldn't accept reality. They tied their horses outside the bank, a brick building that represented Edmund Holloway's pride. Flynn paused before they entered. Let me do most of the talking, he said quietly. It's my debt. Exactly. Which means you're emotional about it. Let me be the disinterested party asking questions. You'll get better answers. It went against her instincts, but she nodded. They entered together. The bank was cool and dim after the bright street. A clerk looked up from behind the counter, his expression shifting from professional welcome to something cooler when he recognized Tabitha. Miss Wilson, Mr. Holloway is expecting you? No, but I need to speak with someone about my father's loan records. I'm afraid Mr. Holloway isn't available at the moment. Then find someone who is, Flynn cut in, his voice pleasant but firm. Miss Wilson has questions about discrepancies in bank documents. Seems like something that should be addressed promptly. The clerk hesitated, clearly caught between routine dismissal and the presence of this stranger who spoke with unexpected authority. I'll see if Mr. Edmund Holloway can see you. He disappeared into the back offices. Tabitha paced, nerves stretched tight. Flynn stood still, watching everything. The other clerk sorting papers, the guard by the vault, the layout of the building. You're doing that thing again, she murmured. What thing? Looking at everything like you're cataloging it, memorizing it. Old habit. What kind of habit? Before he could answer, the clerk returned with Edmund Holloway himself. Where his son was handsome and practiced, the elder Holloway was distinguished and cold. His eyes swept over Tabitha with barely concealed contempt before settling on Flynn with calculation. Miss Wilson, I understand you have questions about your late father's accounts. Your son claims there's an outstanding debt of $3,000. I have a receipt showing the loan was paid in full. I want to see your records. Our records are proprietary, Miss Wilson. Then this receipt is proof you're lying. She pulled the document from her pocket. Edmund took it, examined it briefly, and smiled. This receipt is for a different loan, Miss Wilson, a smaller amount, which was indeed paid. The larger debt, for ranch improvements made last year, remains outstanding. There was no second loan. There was. Your father signed the papers himself last August. I can show you his signature if you'd like. She felt the ground shifting under her. I want to see those papers. I'm afraid they're in our secured files, but I assure you they're quite legitimate. He handed back the receipt. My son made you a generous offer. I suggest you accept it before the situation becomes more complicated. You mean before you burn down more of my property? The words burst out before she could stop them. Edmund's expression didn't change. I have no idea what you're referring to. If you're experiencing difficulties with vandals, perhaps you should speak to Sheriff Cooper. Though I must say, a woman alone trying to run such a large operation does seem to invite trouble. Flynn stepped forward. Seems convenient, doesn't it? Mysterious loan appears, same time someone starts causing problems for Miss Wilson. Makes a man wonder about timing. And who are you exactly? Flynn Garrett. I work for Miss Wilson. A hired hand. Edmund's tone made it clear what he thought of that. Miss Wilson, I've tried to be patient with you. I've tried to be generous, but my patience has limits. You have 14 days to arrange payment or accept our offer to purchase. After that, we'll have no choice but to foreclose. Based on a loan that doesn't exist, based on legally documented debt. Good day, Miss Wilson. It was a dismissal. Tabitha wanted to argue, to demand proof, but Flynn's hand on her arm was gentle but insistent. They left the bank together, emerging into sunlight that seemed too bright after the building's cool shadows. He's lying, she said as soon as they were out of earshot. Yes. But if he has forged papers with my father's signature, then it's his word against yours, and he owns the bank. Flynn's jaw was tight. But forgery is a serious crime. If we can prove it, he goes to jail regardless of his influence. How do we prove it? We'd need those papers, the originals, and we'd need someone with expertise in detecting forgeries. You mean someone like a lawman? She stopped walking, studying him. Who are you really, Flynn Garrett? For a moment she thought he'd deflect again, give her another carefully crafted non-answer. But something in his expression shifted, as if he'd made a decision. Let's talk somewhere private. They ended up in the hotel restaurant, a corner table where they could speak without being overheard. Flynn ordered coffee, neither of them drank, and then he leaned forward, his voice low. I'm not just a drifting ranch hand, he said. Though I am all the things I claimed, I know cattle and horses. I can do the work. But I came to Bitterroot Valley for a specific reason. Tabitha's heart was hammering. What reason? I'm investigating Edmund and Jasper Holloway for land fraud. They've been running schemes across Montana for 3 years, forging documents, intimidating property owners, forcing sales, then flipping the land at huge profits. Some of it goes to legitimate buyers. Some goes to a railroad company that's planning a route through this valley. She stared at him. You're a lawman. U.S. Marshal working undercover. I've been tracking the Holloway's operation for 6 months. When I heard about your father's death and Jasper's immediate interest in your land, I suspected it fit the pattern. So I came here to investigate. The world felt like it was spinning. You used me. No. I took a job I knew I could do while also doing the job I was sent for. I've pulled my weight at the ranch. You can't deny that. But you lied. You let me think you were just someone who needed work. Which was also true. His eyes were steady on hers. Tabitha, I'm sorry for the deception, but if I'd come in as a marshal, the Holloways would have buried all their evidence and you'd have lost your ranch anyway. This way I can help you and complete my investigation. Help me how? By getting proof. By finding those forged documents and other evidence of their schemes. By making sure when we move against them, it sticks. We? You and me. If you'll still have me. He paused. I understand if you want me gone, but Tabitha, Miss Wilson, they're going to take your ranch unless someone stops them, and right now I'm the best chance you have. She wanted to be angry, wanted to throw his deception in his face and send him packing, but the cold, practical part of her that had kept the ranch running for 3 months knew he was right. What do you need from me? She asked finally. Relief crossed his face. Keep doing what you're doing, run your ranch, defend your property, but let me do my job too. I need to get inside that bank, examine their files. I need to find out who else they've targeted, build a case that a judge can't ignore. How long will that take? I don't know, weeks maybe. But you're right about one thing. The fire last night means they're escalating, which means we're running out of time. Tabitha looked at this man she'd hired. This stranger who'd turned out to be something else entirely. You said you came here because you suspected my land fit their pattern. What makes it special? Why this ranch in particular? Flynn pulled a folded map from inside his coat, spreading it on the table. The railroad's planned route comes right through this valley. Most of it crosses public land or territory they've already bought. But there's a section here, he pointed to a line that ran directly through the Wilson Ranch, where your property is the only path that doesn't require expensive bridges or tunneling. With your land, the railroad saves maybe $500,000 in construction costs. And the Holloways know this. They're business partners with the railroad company. They've been quietly buying up the route for 2 years, getting parcels cheap through intimidation and fraud, then selling high to the railroad. Your father's death gave them an opening they couldn't resist. The scale of it was staggering. Her father, her land, her entire life reduced to a line on a map and a calculation of profit. They killed him, she said quietly. What? My father. He died of pneumonia, but he was strong. He shouldn't have. If they knew about this railroad route, if they needed the land. Her voice broke. Did they kill him? Flynn's hand covered hers on the table, warm and solid. I don't know, but I promise you, I'll find out. And if they did, they'll answer for it. It wasn't comfort, exactly, but it was something, a promise of justice from someone who seemed capable of delivering it. All right, she said. What do we do next? You go back to the ranch. Secure what you can, watch for more trouble. I'm going to stay in town tonight, do some quiet investigating. Alone? I work better alone. And if something happens to me, you need to be safe at the ranch. Nothing better happened to you, Mr. Garrett. I just got you broken in as a ranch hand. A smile flickered across his face. Yes, ma'am. They left the hotel separately. Flynn to begin his investigation. Tabitha to ride home with her head spinning and her world fundamentally changed. The man she'd hired was a U.S. Marshal. Her land was wanted for a railroad route. The Holloways were criminals. Her father might have been murdered. It was almost too much to process. As she rode through the afternoon heat, watching the familiar landscape roll past, she realized something else. She wasn't entirely sorry about Flynn's deception. Yes, he'd lied about who he was, but he'd also worked hard, treated her with respect, and was now offering to help save everything she cared about. That had to count for something. Back at the ranch, she found Caleb and Billy had made good progress on the fence repairs. The scattered cattle were mostly rounded up, though they'd lost 3 that had wandered too far or been stolen outright. How'd it go in town? Caleb asked. About as expected. Holloways are claiming there's a second loan showing papers I never saw. That's horseshit. Yes, but proving it's another matter. Where's Garrett? Stayed in town, following up on some things. She couldn't tell Caleb the truth, not yet. The fewer people who knew Flynn was a marshal, the safer everyone was. He'll be back tomorrow. That night, alone in the house with the wind whistling through the gaps in the walls and the darkness pressing close, Tabitha sat at her father's desk and opened his journal. She'd been reading it in pieces since his death, reluctant to finish, as if reading the last page would mean losing him completely. Tonight, she turned to the final entries. August 15th, 1877. Edmund Holloway came by today with papers for a loan to improve the South Range water system. Numbers seemed fair, signed and agreed to terms, should have it paid off in 2 years. Her blood ran cold. There was a second loan. Her father had mentioned it. But she'd gone through all his papers. Where was the documentation? She kept reading. August 20th. Something's not right with that loan. Went back to the bank to review the terms. Holloway was evasive. Said papers were being processed. My gut says this was a mistake. September 3rd. Tried again to get copies of the loan documents. Bank keeps stalling. Edmund claims they're in transit for some legal review. I don't like this. Feel like I signed something I shouldn't have. September 18th. Heard rumors about the railroad route. Some surveyor was in the valley last month, running lines. If that route comes through here, land values will skyrocket. Makes me wonder if Holloway knows more than he's saying. October 1st. Confronted Edmund about the railroad. He denied everything, but I could see it in his eyes. They're trying to steal my land. I need to be careful. Need to protect Tabitha. If something happens to me, she needs to know. The entry ended there. The next entry was 2 weeks later, brief and written in a shaky hand. Feeling poorly. Fever won't break. Told Tabitha about the loan receipt in the strongbox. She'll need it. And then nothing. He died 3 days later. Tabitha sat back, her father's words echoing in her mind. He'd known. He'd suspected the Holloways were plotting something, and he'd tried to protect her. Had that knowledge gotten him killed? She thought about that night, 3 months ago, when he'd taken sick. It had seemed natural. The weather had turned. He'd been working hard. These things happened. But if someone had wanted him dead, if they'd poisoned him or made him sick somehow, No. She was letting suspicion run wild. Pneumonia was common, deaths happened, but the timing was awfully convenient. A knock at the door made her jump. Hand going to the rifle beside the desk, she called out, "Who is it?" "Flynn." She opened the door to find him standing in the darkness, looking tired and grim. "Thought you were staying in town." "Changed my mind. Can I come in?" She stepped aside and he entered, bringing the smell of horse and night air. In the lamplight, she could see dirt on his clothes and a fresh scrape on his knuckles. "What happened?" "Had a conversation with some of Holloway's hired men. They weren't cooperative at first." "You got in a fight?" "Nothing I couldn't handle, but I learned some things." He pulled out a chair, sitting heavily. "There are 5 other properties the Holloways have targeted in the last 2 years. 3 of them sold under pressure. 2 held out and experienced accidents. Fires, cattle poisoning, worse. One of those holdouts died in a riding accident that wasn't quite accidental. They're murderers." "Probably, but proving it is harder than knowing it." He leaned forward. "Tabitha, I found one of their victims, a man named Carson, who sold his place last year. He still lives in town, drinks too much, blames himself for giving up. But he kept copies of everything, including the forged loan papers they used to force him out. Can we use those?" "Maybe. If I can convince him to testify. Right now he's too scared." Flynn's eyes met hers. "But I also learned something else. The Holloways are planning to move soon. Within the week. They're going to foreclose on your ranch, force a sheriff's sale, and buy it themselves for pennies on the dollar." "That fast?" "They've done it before. Once they decide to move, they move hard and quick, which means we're out of time." Tabitha felt the walls closing in. "So what do we do?" "We get proof. We get Carson to talk. We get inside that bank and find those forged documents." He paused. "And we do it in the next few days before they can complete the foreclosure." "How?" "I'm working on that. But Tabitha," his voice softened, "it's going to be dangerous. These men have killed before. They won't hesitate to do it again." "I'm not backing down." "I didn't think you would." Something like admiration crossed his face. "Your father would be proud of you." The words hit harder than expected. She turned away, blinking against sudden tears. "He tried to warn me. I found his journal entries. He knew they were planning something. Smart man. Not smart enough. He's dead and they're still here." Flynn stood, moving closer. "Then we make sure his death means something. We stop them. We protect this land and everyone else they'd victimize." He touched her shoulder gently. "You're not alone in this." She turned to face him, seeing not the drifting cowhand she'd hired, but the lawman he really was. Strong, determined, capable. And she realized someone she was beginning to trust in ways that went beyond professional partnership. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being here. For helping. For," she gestured helplessly, "for being someone who stays." Something shifted in his expression. "I'm not going anywhere, Tabitha. Not until this is finished. And maybe—" He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "Maybe we should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He was right, but as he turned toward the door, she called after him. "Flynn?" "Yes?" "When this is over, when we've stopped the Holloways and saved the ranch, what happens to you? Where do you go?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "Haven't thought that far ahead." "Maybe you should." Their eyes met across the dim room, and something unspoken passed between them. Then Flynn nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. Tabitha stood alone in the lamplight, listening to his boots on the porch boards, feeling the weight of everything they faced pressing down on her shoulders. But mixed with the fear and anger was something else, something that felt almost like hope. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. Outside, the Montana night stretched vast and star-scattered over the land her father had loved, the land she'd sworn to protect. Somewhere in the darkness, enemies plotted and schemed. But here, in this house, in this moment, she had an ally, a partner, someone who'd revealed his secrets to help her and asked nothing in return except the chance to finish his job. Tomorrow would bring new battles. The Holloways would make their move, and she'd have to be ready. But tonight, for the first time since her father died, Tabitha Wilson didn't feel quite so alone. Dawn came cold and clear, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Tabitha stood at the kitchen window, watching Flynn work one of the young horses in the corral. He moved with the animal in perfect rhythm, voice low and steady, hands gentle but firm. The horse, a 2-year-old gelding that had been giving Caleb trouble for weeks, responded to Flynn like they'd known each other for years. "He's got away with them," Caleb said, coming up beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "Horses know who to trust." People could learn from that. "You trust him now?" The old rancher's eyes were sharp. Tabitha took the offered cup, warming her hands on the tin. "I'm getting there." "Good, because we're going to need him for what's coming." She didn't ask how Caleb knew trouble was brewing. He'd spent 50 years reading weather and men, and both were telling him a storm was close. Instead, she drank her coffee and watched Flynn bring the horse to a smooth stop, stroking its neck and speaking words she couldn't hear, but whose tone carried across the morning air. Praise, encouragement, the language of someone who understood that strength without gentleness was just brutality in disguise. "I need to ride out to the North Range today," she said. "Check the cattle we moved last week. You and Billy handle the south section?" "Yep. And Miss Tabitha?" Caleb's voice dropped. "Keep that rifle close, and keep Garrett closer." She met his eyes and saw he understood more than she'd told him. Maybe not the whole truth about Flynn being a marshal, but enough. Enough to know the danger was real and coming fast. An hour later, she and Flynn rode north through grassland still wet with dew. The silence between them was comfortable now, the awkwardness of revealed secrets settling into something steadier. He'd saddled both horses without being asked, checked her rifle and his own, and filled canteens with the efficiency of someone who'd prepared for dangerous rides before. "You're quiet this morning," she said, as they followed the creek toward higher ground. "Thinking." "About?" "About how to get Carson to testify. About how to get evidence from the bank. About—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "About what comes after." "After we stop the Holloways?" "After all of this." He glanced at her, his eyes unreadable in the morning light. "I've been thinking about what you asked last night, where I go when this is done." Her heart beat a little faster. "And?" "Usually I just move on to the next assignment. Next town, next case, next problem to solve. That's how it's been for 3 years." He was quiet for a moment, watching the mountains. "But this feels different." "Different how?" Before he could answer, movement on the ridge above them caught both their attention. 3 riders silhouetted against the sky, too far to identify but close enough to be watching. "Friends of yours?" Flynn asked, his hand already moving toward his rifle. "No." They watched the riders watching them. The moment stretched, tension building like thunder before lightning. Then the figures wheeled their horses and disappeared over the ridge. "Holloway's men," Tabitha said flatly. "Scouting. Seeing where you are, what you're doing." Flynn's jaw tightened. "They're planning something, soon." "Let them come. I'm not hiding. Not suggesting you hide. But maybe we don't make it easy for them either." He turned his horse. "Let's check that cattle and get back to the ranch. I don't like leaving Caleb and Billy alone with those men around." They found the herd grazing peacefully in a broad valley, the cattle healthy and content. But the peace felt fragile, temporary. As they rode back, Tabitha couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on them, of watchers in the hills plotting their next move. It was mid-afternoon when they returned to find a buggy in the yard. Not Holloway's. This was simpler, older. A woman stood on the porch talking to Caleb, her dress practical and worn, her face lined with worry and something harder, anger maybe, or desperation. "Miss Wilson?" The woman turned as they dismounted. "My name is Martha Carson. I believe my husband spoke with your man here last night." Flynn stepped forward. "Mrs. Carson, I didn't expect—" "John came home drunk and raving about the Holloways, about what they'd done to us and others." Her voice was steady despite the emotion behind it. "This morning, sober, he told me everything about your investigation, about Miss Wilson's trouble." She turned to Tabitha. "I've come to help." "Ma'am, your husband is too scared to do what's right." "I'm not." Martha's chin lifted. "The Holloways destroyed us, Took our land, our savings, our dignity. John's been half a man ever since, drowning in whiskey and shame. But I kept everything. Every paper, every receipt, every forged document they used to steal from us. She pulled a leather satchel from her buggy. And I'm prepared to testify. Tabitha looked at Flynn, saw hope and calculation in his eyes. This was the break they needed, but it was also dangerous. Mrs. Carson, Flynn said gently, if you do this, the Holloways will come after you. They won't let this testimony stand without a fight. Let them come. I'm tired of being afraid, tired of watching them hurt good people while the law looks away. She met his eyes squarely. You're really a U.S. Marshal? I am. Then arrest them. Use what I have to put them in prison where they belong. Flynn took the satchel, opening it carefully. Inside were dozens of documents, loan papers, notices, receipts, all bearing the hallmarks of forgery and fraud. His expression grew grimmer as he examined them. This is good, he said finally. This is damning, but we still need the originals from the bank to prove a pattern. And we need to move fast before they can destroy evidence or disappear. What's your plan? Tabitha asked. Tonight, I break into the bank, get the documents we need. Meanwhile, Mrs. Carson, you need to be somewhere safe. They don't know you've come forward yet, but once they do, she can stay here, Tabitha interrupted. We've got room, and we can protect her. Martha looked between them, reading the determination in their faces. All right, but I want to help. I'm done sitting on the sidelines. You are helping, Flynn assured her. This evidence you've brought, it changes everything. They spent the afternoon planning. Flynn would enter the bank after dark, using skills Tabitha suspected he'd learned in less official capacities than his marshal's badge suggested. He'd need an hour, maybe two, to find and photograph the relevant documents. Meanwhile, Tabitha, Caleb, and Billy would guard the ranch and Mrs. Carson, ready for trouble. They might use this as an opportunity to hit the ranch, Flynn warned. If they see me in town, they might figure you're vulnerable. Then they'll learn different, Caleb said, checking his shotgun with practiced ease. As evening approached and Flynn prepared to leave, Tabitha found herself on the porch again, watching him saddle his horse. The sun was sinking toward the mountains, painting the sky in violent shades of red and orange. Be careful, she said. He looked up, something soft in his expression. Always am. Flynn. She hesitated, then pushed forward. What you said this morning, about this feeling different. What did you mean? He finished tightening the cinch before answering. I meant that usually I can leave a place without looking back. Do the job, move on, forget the faces and names. He turned to face her fully. But I don't think I'm going to forget this place. Or you. Her breath caught. Is that a problem? I don't know yet. He moved closer, and she was suddenly aware of how tall he was, how solid. Might be the opposite of a problem, but right now we've got work to do. Can we... He gestured vaguely. Figure this out after. After we save the ranch and put the Holloways in prison? Something like that. That's a hell of a first date, Marshal Garrett. A real smile broke across his face, transforming it. Never been one for conventional romance anyway. He rode out as darkness fell, and Tabitha watched until he disappeared into the twilight. Then she turned to find Martha Carson beside her, a knowing look on the older woman's face. He's a good man, Martha said. I'm beginning to think so. Don't let him get away. Good men are rare as honest bankers. They settled in to wait. Caleb took first watch, walking the perimeter with his shotgun. Billy checked the horses and secured the barn. Martha helped Tabitha prepare a late supper, and as they worked together in the kitchen, the older woman talked. We had a place like this once, she said, peeling potatoes with efficient strokes. Smaller, but ours. Built it from nothing, John and me. 20 years of hard work and hope. Her hand stilled. Then Edmund Holloway came around with his papers and his smile and his promises. Said we could expand, improve, make the place really profitable. All we had to do was sign. My father signed too, Tabitha said quietly. They're clever. The loans seem reasonable at first, but there are clauses hidden in the fine print, terms that can be called at any time, interest rates that change without notice. By the time you realize what you've agreed to, it's too late. Martha resumed peeling. We fought for 6 months, But they had lawyers and judges in their pocket, had men who'd come by at night, make threats, start fires. Eventually, John just broke, said it wasn't worth dying over. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Use that anger to make sure they don't do this to anyone else. Martha's eyes were fierce. That's why I brought those papers. That's why I'm willing to testify. Someone has to stop them. They ate in shifts, keeping watch through the evening. The ranch was quiet under a rising moon, almost peaceful, but Tabitha couldn't shake the tension coiled in her stomach, the certainty that something was coming. It arrived just past midnight. Billy saw them first, riding in from the east with torches. "Riders!" he shouted. 6, maybe 8. Tabitha grabbed her rifle and ran outside. In the moonlight, she could count 7 men approaching at a steady pace, torches held high. At their head rode Jasper Holloway, his face shadowed but his posture confident. "Light the yard lamps," she ordered. "Don't give them darkness to hide in." Caleb moved quickly, lighting the large oil lamps they kept for night work. Warm light flooded the yard, pushing back shadows. Billy took position by the barn, his rifle trained on the approaching riders. Martha appeared with a shotgun Tabitha hadn't known she possessed, taking cover behind a water trough. The riders stopped at the edge of lamplight. Jasper walked his horse forward alone. "Miss Wilson," he called out, "I've come to serve notice. Tomorrow morning, the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings on this property. I suggest you start packing." "You can suggest whatever you want, Holloway. Doesn't mean I'm listening. This is your last chance to do this the easy way. Sell now, walk away with something, or wait until the sheriff throws you off with nothing but the clothes on your back. Your sheriff doesn't scare me, and your fake papers won't hold up in court. My papers are entirely legitimate. Your father's signature, properly witnessed and notarized." And Jasper's smile was visible even in the lamplight. "But if you'd like to contest it, feel free to hire a lawyer. Of course, that will take money you don't have and time you don't have. By then, the land will be mine." "You mean the railroads?" The smile faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And so does everyone else now. Your whole scheme is coming apart, Jasper. U.S. Marshals investigating your father's operation. Got testimony from people you've swindled. Got evidence of forgery and fraud." She was bluffing partially, but his reaction told her the arrow had struck home. "It's over." "You're lying," but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I? Where do you think my new ranch hand is right now, the one who backed my play when you were here before?" She took a gamble. "He's getting warrants. By morning, you and your father will be in federal custody." The men behind Jasper shifted nervously. Hired guns were loyal until federal charges entered the picture. Then they tended to develop sudden memory problems and urgent business elsewhere. "You're bluffing," Jasper said, but he was backing his horse away. "Test me. Come onto my property. See what happens." For a long moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then one of the hired men turned his horse and rode off into darkness. Another followed. Within seconds, only Jasper and 2 others remained. "This isn't over," Jasper snarled. "Yes, it is. You just haven't figured that out yet." He wheeled his horse and galloped after his fleeing men, leaving the torches burning in the dirt. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Tabitha let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Well played," Caleb said, appearing at her elbow. "But you know they'll be back." "I know, but maybe not tonight." She looked at Martha. "You handle a shotgun well for someone who lost everything." "Lost our land. Didn't lose our dignity or our ability to fight." Martha lowered the weapon. "Think your marshal will succeed? If he doesn't, we'll find another way." But privately she was worried. Flynn had been gone for hours now. The bank job should have been finished, unless something had gone wrong. She kept vigil through the small hours, pacing the porch while others rested. The moon tracked slowly across the sky, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and still Flynn didn't return. By 3 a.m, she was fighting panic. Then she heard hoofbeats. One rider, coming fast. She raised her rifle, then lowered it as she recognized Flynn's horse. But something was wrong. He was riding hunched over, one hand pressed to his side. "Flynn!" She ran to meet him as he pulled up in the yard. Even in lamplight, she could see blood on his shirt. "What happened?" "Guard I didn't know about. We had a disagreement." He slid from the saddle, stumbling slightly. "Got the documents, though. In the saddlebag." Caleb appeared, taking Flynn's arm. Get him inside. I'll tend the horse. They half carried him into the house, sitting him at the kitchen table. Martha appeared with water and clean cloth while Tabitha carefully pulled back his torn shirt. The wound was along his ribs, deep enough to bleed heavily but not life-threatening if they could stop the bleeding and prevent infection. Did you kill him? She asked, pressing cloth against the wound. No, knocked him out. But he'll talk when he wakes up. We need to move fast. Flynn gritted his teeth as she applied pressure. The documents are all there. Forgeries going back 3 years, names, dates, amounts. Enough to put both Holloways in prison for decades. And enough to clear my father's name? More than enough. He was set up from the start. The loan he signed was legitimate, small amount, fair terms. The second loan is pure forgery. Someone copied his signature from the first document. Relief and rage mixed in her chest. So we have them. We do, but... He caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a wounded man. They know someone was in the bank. They'll figure out who. They'll come after us with everything they have. Let them. Tabitha, I'm serious. These men are cornered now. Cornered men do desperate things. Then we'll be ready. She finished bandaging his ribs, her hands gentler than her tone. Rest now. Morning's only a few hours away and we've got work to do. But Flynn caught her hand again as she turned away. Thank you. For what? For trusting me. For fighting. For... He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. For making this worth more than just another case. She knelt beside his chair, meeting his eyes level. Flynn Garrett, if you die on me before we finish this, I'm going to be very put out. Yes, ma'am. I'll do my best to avoid that. See that you do. She stood, all business again despite the warmth in her chest. Now rest. I need you functional tomorrow. Dawn came too soon and not soon enough. Flynn was pale but steady, his wound cleaned and wrapped properly. The documents he'd stolen from the bank lay spread across the kitchen table like evidence at a trial, which, Tabitha supposed, they would be. Martha Carson studied them with grim satisfaction. This is everything I remembered and more. With my testimony and these papers, no judge in Montana could let them walk free. Problem is getting it to a judge, Flynn said. Sheriff Cooper is in the Holloway's pocket. We need to get this to the federal courthouse in Helena. That's 3 days' ride, Caleb pointed out. 2 if you push hard. I can make it in... You can't make it to the barn in your condition, Tabitha interrupted. You're not riding anywhere. Someone has to take this evidence. I'll go. All eyes turned to Martha. She stood straight, resolve clear in her face. I'll take the documents and my testimony to Helena. File formal charges. Get federal warrants issued. Mrs. Carson, that's a hard ride. I've made hard rides before. And I'm not wounded. She looked at each of them in turn. I can do this. Let me do this. Flynn exchanged glances with Tabitha. It was risky sending a civilian, but it was riskier sending a wounded marshal or leaving the ranch completely undefended. All right, Flynn decided. But we do this smart. You leave now, before full light. Take the old trail through the mountains. Longer, but harder to follow. Once you're in Helena, go straight to Judge Morrison. Tell him Marshal Flynn Garrett sent you with evidence of federal crimes. He'll know what to do. And if the Holloway's men catch me, then you run. Don't try to fight. Just get to safety and send word. He pulled a badge from his pocket, pressing it into her hand. Show this if you need to. It'll identify you as working with federal authorities. Martha tucked the badge and documents into a leather case, securing it carefully. Then, surprising everyone, she hugged Tabitha. Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right. Thank you for having the courage to come forward. Within the hour, Martha Carson was riding north toward the mountains and Helena, carrying evidence that could topple the Holloway Empire. They watched her go with mixed hope and dread. Think she'll make it? Billy asked. She's tougher than she looks, Caleb said, and she's got reasons to ride hard. Now they waited. Flynn, despite his injury, insisted on helping with ranch work. Tabitha watched him move carefully through the morning tasks, favoring his wounded side but never complaining. By noon, she couldn't take it anymore. You, she said, pointing at him as he tried to lift a hay bale. Inside, now. I'm fine. You're bleeding through your bandage and being stubborn. Inside. He followed her to the house, and she changed his dressing with hands that were steadier than her voice. You're going to tear these stitches if you keep pushing. Can't just sit while there's work to be done. Yes, you can. That's an order. She tied off the fresh bandage, then sat back on her heels, looking up at him. Flynn, I need you healthy for what's coming. The Holloways aren't going to accept defeat quietly. When they move, and they will, I need you able to fight. Something softened in his expression. You're worried about me. Of course I'm worried about you. You got shot breaking into a bank for me. For justice. And myself, not just for you. Still. She stood, suddenly aware of how close they were in the quiet kitchen. I'd rather not lose anyone else She caught herself. Anyone else I depend on. He stood too, one hand coming up to touch her face with surprising gentleness for a man who'd been in a gunfight hours ago. Tabitha Wilson, you are the most stubborn, brave, infuriating woman I've ever met. That's not a compliment. Yes, it is. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I've worked with a lot of people. Scared people, angry people, desperate people. But I've never worked with anyone who faces down armed men in her nightdress and threats of ruin with nothing but a rifle and refusal to quit. What choice do I have? Everyone has choices. You chose to fight. Not everyone would. She was very aware of his hand on her face, of the warmth of him close by, of how easy it would be to lean in and close the distance between them. But before she could act on that impulse, Caleb's shout shattered the moment. Riders incoming! From town! They broke apart, Flynn moving toward the window with his hand on his gun despite his injury. Tabitha grabbed her rifle and stepped onto the porch. But these weren't Holloway's men. It was Sheriff Cooper, accompanied by 2 deputies, riding hard and looking official. Miss Wilson, Cooper called, reining up in her yard. I have a warrant for the arrest of one Flynn Garrett, wanted for breaking and entering the Bitterroot Valley Bank. Flynn appeared beside her, his face calm despite the guns pointed their direction. Sheriff? Marshal Garrett, Cooper corrected, pulling another paper from his pocket. I also have a message from the federal courthouse in Helena. Judge Morrison sends his compliments and says your evidence is being reviewed. But until then, you're under arrest for illegal entry and theft. That evidence was obtained in pursuit of federal crimes. So you say. The Holloways say you're a rogue marshal conducting an illegal investigation. Judge Morrison says everyone comes to Helena and sorts this out proper. Cooper's face was apologetic but firm. I got to bring you in, Marshal. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Tabitha stepped forward, rifle raised. No. Miss Wilson, please. He's wounded and he's on my property. You want him? You go through me. Ma'am, I don't want trouble. Then ride away, Sheriff. Tell the Holloways their games are over. Tell Judge Morrison we'll all come to Helena when we're ready and not before. Cooper looked at his deputies, who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the idea of forcing the issue. Miss Wilson, you're obstructing justice. No, I'm protecting it. Real justice, not the kind your bosses try to buy. She didn't lower the rifle. You want Flynn, you better bring more men and get ready for a war. Because I promise you, this ranch will not surrender to corruption and false charges. The moment balanced on a knife edge. Then Flynn spoke quietly. It's all right, Tabitha. Let me go. No. Yes. He touched her shoulder. This is how it has to work. Evidence goes before the judge. I answer charges. Everything gets sorted legally. Mrs. Carson got the documents to Helena. The process has started. Fighting the sheriff now just makes us look guilty. They could kill you. They won't. Too public now. Too many people watching. He turned to Cooper. I'll come peacefully, Sheriff. But I want your word she's protected while I'm gone. If anything happens to this ranch or Miss Wilson, I'll hold you personally responsible. Nothing will happen, Cooper said. You have my word. Flynn handed over his gun belt, then turned back to Tabitha. For a moment, in front of everyone, he cupped her face with both hands. Trust me, this is going to work out. It better, Flynn Garrett, because I'm not done with you yet. He smiled, quick and bright. Good. Then the sheriff was leading him away, and Tabitha stood on her porch watching another person she cared about ride toward uncertain fate. Caleb appeared beside her. He'll be all right, the old rancher said. You can't know that. No, but I know he's a tough man with right on his side. That counts for something. The days that followed were the longest of Tabitha's life. She threw herself into ranch work, driving herself and the cattle with equal intensity. But at night, alone in her father's house with his journal and her fears, she could barely sleep. Flynn was in the Holloway's town, in their jail, vulnerable to accidents and convenient justice. On the third day, a rider came from Helena. He was federal, that much was clear from his bearing and his papers. Deputy U.S. Marshal Robert Chen, carrying orders from Judge Morrison. "Miss Wilson," he said formally, "I'm here to escort you to Helena for testimony in the matter of United States versus Edmund and Jasper Holloway." Her heart leaped. They've been charged. Arrested yesterday on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Your testimony and Mrs. Carson's evidence was compelling. Judge wants to hear from everyone involved. He smiled slightly. Marshal Garrett especially requested you be brought safely. He's all right? Released on his own recognizance yesterday. He's been helping coordinate the investigation. Chen dismounted. We've got warrants for 24 associates of the Holloways, including Sheriff Cooper. It's the biggest fraud case Montana's seen in years. Relief made her knees weak. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning. Pack what you need for a week in Helena. This trial's going to be thorough. That night, Tabitha stood on her porch one last time before the journey, looking out over the land her father had died protecting. The ranch was safe now. Federal marshals would watch it until the trial concluded. Caleb and Billy would keep things running. Everything she'd fought for was secure. But more than that, she was going to see Flynn again. Flynn, who'd risked his life for her and her land. Flynn, who looked at her like she was someone worth defending. Flynn, who'd somehow become more than just a marshal or a ranch hand in the weeks since he'd ridden into her life. Be ready, Mr. Garrett, she whispered to the night, because we've got things to figure out. The wind carried her words away across the grasslands, but she felt lighter than she had in months. The fight wasn't over. There would be a trial, testimony, legal battles. But for the first time since her father died, she wasn't facing everything alone. Tomorrow she'd ride to Helena, to justice, to truth, and to a man who'd promised to stay if she chose him. And God help her, she thought she might just choose exactly that. The ride to Helena took 2 days through mountain passes still holding winter's memory in their shadows. Deputy Marshal Chen proved to be good company, telling stories of other cases and carefully not asking about the tension that kept Tabitha's hands tight on the reins and her eyes fixed on the horizon. By the second evening, when the territorial capital's lights appeared in the valley below, her heart was hammering against her ribs with an intensity that had nothing to do with the long ride. We'll get you settled at the Grand Hotel, Chen said as they descended toward the town. Federal government's paying, so don't worry about the expense. Tomorrow morning, you'll meet with the prosecutor to prepare your testimony. Trial starts the day after. And Marshal Garrett? He's been staying at the courthouse, working with Judge Morrison's staff to organize evidence. Chen glanced at her with knowing eyes. I'm sure he'll want to know you've arrived safely. Helena was bigger than Bitterroot, busier and louder, with electric lights strung along the main streets and the constant noise of progress and commerce. The Grand Hotel rose 3 stories of red brick and white trim, fancier than anywhere Tabitha had ever stayed. The desk clerk barely blinked at her trail-worn appearance, simply handing over a key and directing her to a room on the 2nd floor. Marshal Garrett left instructions, the clerk added. He'll meet you in the dining room at 7 o'clock, if that's convenient. It was just past 6. Tabitha climbed the stairs to her room, found a bath already drawn and waiting, and spent the next 40 minutes scrubbing away 2 days of trail dust while her mind raced. She hadn't seen Flynn in nearly a week. 7 days that felt like 7 years, not knowing if he was safe, if the Holloways had found some way to hurt him, if federal justice would prove as corrupt as local law. But he was here. He was safe. And in less than an hour, she'd see him again. She dressed in the one good outfit she'd brought, a simple navy dress her mother had made years ago, still serviceable, if not fashionable. Her hands shook as she pinned up her hair, and she cursed herself for acting like a nervous girl instead of a woman who'd faced down armed men and saved her ranch. But this was different. This was about something more than land or justice or survival. This was about whatever had been building between her and Flynn since the moment he'd ridden onto her property and asked for work. The dining room was half full when she descended, well-dressed men and women enjoying meals that probably cost more than Caleb's monthly wages. She felt out of place until she saw Flynn rising from a corner table, and then nothing else mattered. He looked different in a proper suit, his dark hair trimmed and his face clean-shaven. But the eyes were the same, those sharp blue eyes that saw too much and promised even more. He moved toward her carefully, still favoring his wounded side, and she resisted the urge to run across the room like a fool. "Miss Wilson," he said formally when he reached her, but his voice was warm. "You're a sight for sore eyes." "Marshal Garrett." She couldn't quite keep the emotion from her voice. "You're looking considerably healthier than when I last saw you. Had good care before I left. Excellent nurse." He offered his arm. "Shall we sit? I took the liberty of ordering, hope you don't mind. Figured you'd be hungry after the ride." They settled at the table and for a moment just looked at each other across the white tablecloth and silver settings. Then Flynn reached across and took her hand, and the formality shattered. "I was worried about you," she said quietly. "I know, I'm sorry for that. But it had to be done this way, everything legal and proper, or the Holloways would have claimed persecution and gotten the case thrown out." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "How's the ranch?" "Secure. Federal marshals watching it. Caleb and Billy keeping things running." She squeezed his hand. "How bad is it? The case, I mean." "Bad for the Holloways, good for everyone else." He leaned back as a waiter appeared with plates of roast beef and vegetables. When they were alone again, Flynn continued. "Mrs. Carson's testimony opened the floodgates. Once word got out that federal charges were filed, 8 other victims came forward. We've documented 15 separate cases of fraud going back 4 years, totaling over $100,000 in stolen property and illegal profits." Tabitha's breath caught. "That's massive. And it gets worse. The railroad company claims they knew nothing about the Holloway's methods, but we've found correspondence suggesting otherwise. They might face charges too." He cut into his meat, the motion careful. "Your father's case is central to it all. His journal entries, the forged documents, the timeline, it proves pattern and intent." "So they'll convict?" "If the jury's honest, yes. But that's always the question, isn't it?" His expression darkened. "Edmund Holloway still has money and influence. He's hired the best lawyers in the territory. They're going to fight hard." "Let them fight. We've got truth on our side." "Truth doesn't always win in court, Tabitha. I've seen guilty men walk free and innocent ones hang. It's about who tells the better story, who the jury believes." He met her eyes. "Tomorrow you're going to testify about your father, about the ranch, about everything that's happened. The defense will try to make you look incompetent or emotional or like you're part of some conspiracy against innocent businessmen. They'll be vicious." "I can handle vicious." "I know you can, but I wanted to warn you." He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. "I also wanted to see you before it all starts. Because once we're in that courtroom, we have to be professional. Marshal and witness. Can't be—" He gestured between them. "Whatever this is." "And what is this, Flynn?" The question hung between them. Around them, the dining room continued its elegant business, but they might have been alone for all the attention they paid to anyone else. "I don't know exactly," Flynn said finally, "but I know I think about you when I shouldn't be distracted. I know leaving your ranch was the hardest part of coming here. I know—" He stopped, then pushed forward. "I know that when this is over, I don't want to just move on to the next case and forget Montana." Her heart was racing again. "What do you want?" "More time to figure that out. More conversations like this one. More mornings watching you stand on your porch defending what's yours with nothing but courage and a rifle." He smiled slightly. "Maybe a chance to court you proper, if you're interested in being courted by a drifting marshal who's not much good at staying in one place." "You seemed pretty good at staying when you were at my ranch." "That's because I had a reason to stay." "And now?" "Now I'm hoping you'll give me another reason. After the trial. After everything's settled." His hand tightened on hers. "I'm asking you to wait, Tabitha. Wait and see if maybe we've got something worth building on." She thought about saying yes immediately, about throwing caution away and admitting that she'd been thinking the same thing for weeks now. But something held her back, Not doubt about her feelings, but awareness that they were both standing on the edge of something that could change everything. "Ask me again after we win," she said finally. "After justice is done and my ranch is truly safe and you're not bleeding from gunshot wounds. Ask me then, and I'll give you an answer." "That a promise?" "That's a guarantee, Marshal Garrett." They finished dinner talking about safer things: the ranch, the cattle, Billy's improving skills with horses. But underneath the casual conversation ran a current of awareness, of anticipation, of two people acknowledging something important without quite giving it a name yet. When Flynn walked her to her room, he stopped outside her door with careful propriety. "Tomorrow's going to be hard. The prosecutor will prepare you in the morning, but I wanted to say, just tell the truth. Don't embellish, don't hold back. Tell them about your father, about the ranch, about everything you've fought for. Make them see you, really see you. That's how we win." "Will you be there?" "In the courtroom, yes. Can't testify since I'm an investigating officer, but I'll be there." He touched her face gently. "You're going to do fine." "Flynn," she caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. "Thank you for everything, for believing me, for fighting for me, for—" He kissed her then, soft and careful, a promise more than a passion. When he pulled back, his eyes were warm. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start making sure justice actually happens." She watched him walk away down the corridor, then slipped into her room with her lips still tingling and her mind already racing toward the next day's challenges. Morning came too early and too bright. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Thomas Blackwell, met with her in a courthouse office that smelled of old books and new ambition. He walked her through her testimony methodically, asking questions and then asking them again different ways, preparing her for the defense's tactics. "They'll try to paint you as a bitter woman who couldn't handle ranch life," Blackwell warned. "They'll suggest you manufactured this entire case because you were failing and needed someone to blame. Let them try. I've got receipts, records, witnesses." "I know, but juries don't always care about facts. They care about feelings, about who seems more trustworthy." He studied her critically. "You're young, female, emotional about your father. The defense will use all of that against you. So what do I do?" "Stay calm. Answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information. And when they attack you, because they will, don't get angry. Getting angry makes you look irrational." He softened slightly. "I know it's not fair, but that's how these things work." The courtroom was packed when they arrived that afternoon. Tabitha was startled by the crowd. Townspeople, journalists, curious onlookers drawn by the scandal of prominent citizens facing federal charges. She found Flynn standing near the prosecutor's table, and his slight nod gave her courage as she took her seat. The Holloways sat at the defense table with their expensive lawyers, both father and son dressed in fine suits and expressions of injured innocence. Jasper's eyes found hers across the courtroom, and the hatred there was undisguised. Edmund simply looked bored, as if this entire proceeding was beneath his notice. Judge Morrison entered, and everyone rose. He was older than Tabitha expected, with white hair and eyes that suggested he'd seen every trick lawyers could devise. "Be seated," he said, his voice carrying authority. "We're here today to begin proceedings in United States versus Edmund Holloway and Jasper Holloway. Charges include fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and racketeering. Mr. Blackwell, call your first witness." The United States calls Mrs. Martha Carson. Martha took the stand with visible nervousness but underlying steel. She testified about her ranch, the loan, the forged documents, and the systematic intimidation that had driven her family off their land. The defense cross-examined aggressively, but she held firm, her answers consistent and credible. Two more victims testified that afternoon. Their stories disturbingly similar. Legitimate loans that became traps, paperwork that changed after signing, threats and violence when they tried to fight. By the time court adjourned for the day, a clear pattern had emerged. "Tomorrow's your turn," Flynn told Tabitha as they left the courthouse. "You're the emotional center of the case, the daughter seeking justice for her murdered father." "He wasn't murdered. It was pneumonia." "Are you sure?" Flynn's voice was gentle but insistent. "Really sure? Because I've been thinking about the timeline. Your father gets suspicious about the loan in August. By October, he's confronting Edmund about the railroad. November, he falls sick and dies within a week. Pneumonia can kill quickly. It can, but poison can look like pneumonia if administered correctly, especially certain plant-based toxins native to this area. He saw her expression and continued quickly. I'm not saying we can prove it, but your father's journal suggests he was healthy until suddenly he wasn't, and the timing was awfully convenient for the Holloways. The possibility hit her like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on the fraud, on saving the ranch, that she hadn't let herself think about the darker possibility. But now, standing in the shadow of the courthouse with Flynn watching her carefully, she couldn't avoid it. You think they killed him? I think it's possible, and I think the jury should know it's possible. He took her arm, steadying her. Tomorrow, when you testify, tell them about his health before. Tell them how suddenly he fell sick, how quickly he died. Don't accuse, just tell the facts. Let the jury draw their own conclusions. That night, she barely slept. She kept seeing her father's face in those last fevered hours, kept hearing his rasping breath as the pneumonia filled his lungs. Had it been natural? Or had someone poisoned him, made it look like illness, murdered him for the land he wouldn't sell? By morning, she was exhausted and furious, and that combination made her dangerous. The courtroom was even more crowded for her testimony. Tabitha wore the navy dress again, her hair pinned severely back, her hand steady on the Bible as she swore to tell the truth. Blackwell stood and smiled at her encouragingly. Please state your name for the record. Tabitha Marie Wilson. And you are the daughter of the late Thomas Wilson? I am. Tell us about your father, Miss Wilson. What kind of man was he? She took a breath, finding Flynn in the crowd. He nodded slightly. Tell them the truth. Make them see. My father was the best man I ever knew, she began, and her voice was steady. He built the Wilson Ranch from nothing, spent 30 years turning hard ground into productive land. He taught me everything, how to run cattle, how to manage books, how to stand your ground when men tried to push you around. He was honest, hardworking, and proud of what he'd built. Did he ever take out a loan from the Bitterroot Valley Bank? Yes, in August of last year. A small loan for ranch improvements, properly documented and paid off within 3 days of his death. Are you aware of any other loans? Not until Jasper Holloway claimed there was a second loan totaling $3,000. I searched my father's papers and found no documentation of any such loan. Blackwell walked her through the timeline, the original loan, her father's growing suspicions, his journal entries about the railroad, and finally, his death. She testified clearly, sticking to facts, letting the story tell itself. Miss Wilson, in his journal, your father expressed concern about the bank and Edmund Holloway. Did he ever suggest he felt threatened? He said he needed to protect me, that if something happened to him, I needed to know the truth. Her voice caught slightly. He died a week later. Tell us about his illness. He was healthy right up until he wasn't. One day working full strength, the next he could barely stand. Fever, difficulty breathing, confusion. The doctor said pneumonia, but it came on so fast. She stopped, gathered herself. My father was strong. He'd worked through worse. But this illness, it took him in less than a week. By the end, he couldn't even speak clearly. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. What happened after your father's death? I inherited the ranch and determined to keep it running. Within a week, Jasper Holloway made the first of 3 offers to buy it at prices well below market value. When I refused, things started happening. Fences cut, cattle scattered, a line shack burned. Then he came with forged loan documents claiming I owed $3,000. She continued through the rest of the story, hiring Flynn, Mrs. Carson's testimony, the evidence of widespread fraud. Blackwell led her carefully through each point, building his case brick by brick. Then came the cross-examination. The defense lawyer was named Hamilton Price, and he was everything Flynn had warned about, smooth, aggressive, and skilled at twisting facts. He approached the witness stand with a smile that never reached his eyes. Miss Wilson, you've painted quite a dramatic picture for us. Your poor murdered father, the evil bankers, yourself as the innocent victim. His tone was mocking. But let's talk about some facts, shall we? I've only told facts. Have you? Let's see. You claim your father was healthy before he fell ill, but wasn't he 62 years old? Isn't that an age where sudden illness is unfortunately common? He was strong, but 62. And you claim he was murdered, but there was never an autopsy, was there? No medical evidence of poisoning? I didn't say he was murdered. I said his death was sudden and convenient for people who wanted his land. Ah, yes, the conspiracy. Tell me, Miss Wilson, how long have you been running the ranch alone? 3 months. And has it been successful? She hesitated, seeing the trap but unable to avoid it. We face challenges. Challenges like financial difficulties, like inability to hire adequate staff, like failure to properly maintain property? Price's voice rose slightly. Isn't it true that you were failing, and rather than accept responsibility, you've concocted this elaborate story to blame my clients? That's not true. No? Then explain why you hired a federal marshal without telling anyone his real identity. Explain why you've produced alleged evidence obtained through illegal means. Explain why every setback you faced, from your own incompetence, I might add, is blamed on my clients. Objection, Blackwell called. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Mr. Price, ask questions, don't make speeches. But the damage was done. Price had planted doubt, made her look either incompetent or conspiratorial. He continued the attack for another 20 minutes, questioning her judgment, her testimony, her motives. By the time Judge Morrison finally called for a recess, Tabitha was shaking with suppressed fury. Flynn found her in the hallway outside the courtroom. Without a word, he steered her into an empty office and closed the door. I know, he said before she could speak. I know he made you look bad. That's his job. He made me look like a fool or a liar. He tried. But Tabitha, anyone who was actually listening heard the truth. You were honest, straightforward, and credible. That's what matters. Is it? Because half that courtroom probably thinks I'm a bitter woman who can't accept failure. The other half knows you're a brave woman fighting corruption. And the jury, he turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. The jury heard your father's journal entries read into evidence. They heard about the sudden illness and convenient death. They heard about systematic intimidation and forged documents. Price can attack you all he wants, but he can't change those facts. She wanted to believe him, but doubt had taken root, the same doubt that had plagued her since her father's death. What if she really was failing? What if all of this was too big for her? Hey, Flynn's voice was gentle. Remember who you are. You're the woman who faced down Jasper Holloway and his hired guns. You're the woman who ran a ranch alone when everyone said you'd fail. You're the woman who trusted a stranger's investigation and risked everything for justice. He smiled slightly. You're also the woman who told me she'd give me an answer after we win. So we're going to win, because I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Despite everything, she laughed. You're a manipulative man, Marshall Garrett. I prefer to think of it as strategic encouragement. He pulled her into a brief, fierce hug, mindful of the public hallway. Come on. Blackwell will want to prep you for redirect examination. The afternoon session was brutal. Price continued his assault, questioning every aspect of Tabitha's testimony and character, but she held steady, remembering Flynn's words. Tell the truth, stay calm, let the facts speak. By the time she was finally excused, she was exhausted. But she'd survived the worst the defense could throw at her, and the core of her testimony remained unshaken. The trial continued for 3 more days. Expert witnesses testified about the forged signatures. Banking officials confirmed inconsistencies in the loan records, and even a railroad executive admitted under oath that the Holloways had been buying land along the planned route. The evidence piled up, damning and undeniable. Flynn testified on the 4th day, his marshal's credentials lending weight to the investigation. The defense tried to attack him too, suggesting he'd fabricated evidence or conducted an illegal investigation. But Flynn was unshakable, his testimony precise and professional, walking the jury through exactly how he'd built the case. Watching him, Tabitha felt pride mixed with something deeper. This man had risked his career and his life to bring criminals to justice, had worked her ranch and slept in her bunkhouse and fought beside her, all while pursuing a larger purpose. He was everything she'd never known she wanted, strong but gentle, determined but patient, capable but humble. And when this was over, she was going to tell him exactly that. The final day of testimony belonged to Edmund Holloway himself. He took the stand with arrogant confidence, denying everything. The loans were legitimate. The signatures were real. Any violence or intimidation had been perpetrated by overzealous employees acting without his knowledge. He was a respectable businessman being persecuted by federal overreach and bitter former clients. He was also, Tabitha realized as she watched, a skilled liar. He spoke smoothly, never hesitating, projecting an image of injured innocence. If she hadn't known the truth, hadn't seen the evidence, she might have believed him herself. The closing arguments came the next morning. Blackwell spoke first, walking the jury through the mountain of evidence, the pattern of fraud, the lives destroyed. "These men," he said, pointing at the Holloways, "are not businessmen. They're criminals who use their position and influence to steal from hardworking people. They forged documents, intimidated witnesses, and quite possibly murdered a man who threatened to expose them. The evidence is overwhelming. The only question is whether you'll have the courage to hold them accountable." Price's closing was equally powerful. He painted the Holloways as victims of a federal witch hunt, suggested the evidence was circumstantial or manufactured, and appealed to the jury's skepticism of government power. "My clients are not perfect," he admitted, "but being imperfect is not a crime. The prosecution wants you to convict based on emotion and conspiracy theories. I ask you to demand real proof, which they have not provided." The jury retired to deliberate just before noon. Tabitha sat in the courthouse hallway with Flynn, Martha Carson, and the other victims, waiting. Hours crawled past. Afternoon became evening. Still no verdict. "Is that good or bad?" Tabitha asked Flynn as darkness fell outside. "Hard to say. Quick verdict usually means overwhelming evidence one way or the other. Long deliberation means they're really weighing everything." He took her hand, not caring who saw. "All we can do is wait." They waited through dinner, through evening, through the night. Judge Morrison finally sent everyone home at midnight with instructions to return at 9 the next morning. Flynn walked Tabitha to her hotel, both of them too keyed up to be tired. "I can't go through another day of this," she said as they stood outside her door. "The not knowing is worse than anything." "I know." He pulled her close, and she let herself lean against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "But whatever happens tomorrow, Tabitha, you've already won. You stood up to them. You fought back. You didn't let them break you. That matters. It won't matter if they walk free. Even then, because you'll go back to your ranch with your head high, knowing you did everything right. And I'll—" He paused, then continued quietly, "I'll be there with you, if you want, however long you want." She pulled back to look at him. "You said to ask you after we win. I'm changing the terms. Ask me now." Her heart was pounding. "Flynn Garrett, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I don't want to wait anymore. I'm saying these past weeks have taught me that life's too uncertain to postpone what matters. I'm saying," he cupped her face with both hands, "I want to stay. Not because you need me, but because I want to be where you are. If you'll have a drifting marshal who's not very good at pretty words, but who loves you more than he thought he could love anything." The word hung between them, love, simple and enormous and terrifying and perfect. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I'll have you. Because I love you too, you impossible man. I love your strength and your courage and the way you gentle horses and the way you fight for what's right. I love—" He kissed her before she could finish, and this kiss was nothing like the careful promise of before. This was need and relief and joy, all mixed together, a declaration of something that couldn't be taken back. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much," he said. "A marshal's salary, a horse, a saddle. But if you want me, I don't need you to have anything except yourself. Just stay, Flynn. Be someone who stays." "I can do that." He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "I can definitely do that." They stood in the hallway for a long time, holding each other, while the hotel settled into quiet around them, and somewhere in the courthouse a jury debated justice. Morning came with news. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom packed even faster than before, everyone sensing the approaching resolution. Tabitha sat in the front row, Flynn beside her now without pretense of professional distance. She laced her fingers through his and held tight as the jury filed in, trying to read their faces and finding nothing. Judge Morrison called the court to order. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The foreman was a rancher from the eastern part of the territory, weathered and serious. In the case of United States versus Edmund Holloway, on the charge of fraud, how do you find? Guilty. The words seemed to echo. Tabitha's breath caught. On the charge of forgery? Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy? Guilty. On the charge of racketeering? Guilty. The foreman continued through the entire list of charges, each answer the same. Guilty, guilty, guilty. At the defense table, Edmund Holloway's face had gone white. Jasper slumped in his chair, all arrogance gone. And in the case of United States versus Jasper Holloway, the results were identical, guilty on all counts. Judge Morrison's gavel fell. The defendants will be remanded into custody pending sentencing, which will occur in 2 weeks. This court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Tabitha sat frozen, unable to quite process that it was over. They'd won. Justice had actually happened. Then Flynn was pulling her to her feet, and she was laughing and crying at the same time, and Martha Carson was hugging them both, and somewhere in the chaos of celebration, a weight she'd been carrying for months finally lifted. Outside the courthouse, in the afternoon sun, Blackwell found them. Miss Wilson, I wanted you to know Judge Morrison is preparing orders to void all fraudulent loans and return properties to their rightful owners. Your ranch will be free and clear. Thank you. Thank you for everything. Thank you for having the courage to come forward. Without you and Mrs. Carson, none of this would have been possible. He shook Flynn's hand. And Marshall, excellent work. The Bureau should be proud. When the prosecutor had gone, Flynn turned to Tabitha. So, we won. We did. Which means you owe me an answer to a question. She smiled, feeling lighter than air. You already asked that question last night, and I already gave you an answer. That was before the verdict. Figured I should make sure you didn't change your mind. I haven't changed my mind, Flynn Garrett. You asked me to let you stay, to be someone who stays. And yes, God, yes, that's what I want. He kissed her right there on the courthouse steps, in front of judges and lawyers and half of Helena, and Tabitha didn't care who saw. This man had fought beside her, believed in her, loved her, and now finally the fight was over and the future was theirs to build. So what happens now? She asked when they finally broke apart. Now we go home, back to your ranch, back to the life you've been defending. He smiled. And I request a permanent assignment to the Montana Territory because it turns out I've got strong reasons to stay in one place for a while. Just for a while? Forever, if you'll have me that long. She took his hand, feeling the calluses earned through ranch work and gunfights and everything they'd been through together. Forever sounds about right. They stood together on the courthouse steps as the sun painted the mountains gold, two people who'd found each other in the middle of a fight and discovered something worth more than justice or land or victory. They'd found partnership, they'd found love, and they'd found home. The journey back to the ranch took 3 days, but they stretched it to 4, riding slow through country that seemed more beautiful now that the weight of fear and uncertainty had lifted. Flynn rode beside Tabitha instead of behind, and Deputy Marshal Chen had stayed in Helena to handle paperwork, leaving them alone with the mountains and the wide sky and the future spreading before them like the grasslands. They talked more in those 4 days than they had in all the weeks before. Flynn told her about growing up in Missouri, about joining the Army at 17 and learning to shoot and track and survive, about mustering out after 4 years and drifting west, taking marshal work because he was good at it and because it gave purpose to skills he'd learned in war, about cases he'd worked and places he'd been, and how none of it had felt like home until he'd ridden onto a ranch in Montana and met a woman who wouldn't back down from anything. Tabitha told him about her mother, dead from fever when Tabitha was 12, and how her father had raised her to be capable and independent because he'd had no choice but also because he'd believed she could be. About learning to rope and ride and shoot, about the neighbors who'd whispered that Thomas Wilson was ruining his daughter by teaching her men's work, about the loneliness of being different and the pride of proving everyone wrong. He would have liked you, she said on the 3rd night, as they sat by their campfire under a ceiling of stars. My father. He had a sense about people, could tell who was solid and who was just pretending. He would have known you were solid straight off. I wish I could have met him. Asked his permission proper-like before declaring my intentions to his daughter. Flynn smiled slightly, though something tells me you wouldn't have appreciated that much. You're damn right I wouldn't have. I don't need any man's permission, even my father's, but her voice was gentle. Still, it would have been nice. The two of you sitting on the porch, talking about cattle and horses and whether that new hand was worth keeping on. Is he? Worth keeping on? She leaned against his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her automatically. I suppose he'll do. He's handy with horses and not terrible in a gunfight. Could use some work on following orders, though. Yes, ma'am. I'll work on that. They were quiet for a while, watching sparks rise toward the stars. Then Tabitha said, "What happens when we get back?" Really happens, I mean. You said you'd request permanent assignment to Montana, but what does that mean? Means I'd be based in Helena, but covering the whole territory. Investigating federal crimes, serving warrants, that sort of thing. He was quiet for a moment. Means I'd be gone sometimes. Days or weeks, depending on the case. That going to be a problem? She'd been thinking about this, turning it over in her mind during the long rides. Not if you always come back. Not if when you're at the ranch, you're really there. Not just between cases, but actually part of the life I'm building. She pulled back to look at him. I won't be a woman who sits home worrying while her man rides off to danger. If you're gone, I need to know you trust me to handle things, and when you're home, I need you to be my partner, not my protector. I can do that. He touched her face gently. Tabitha, I've worked with a lot of men, strong men, brave men, skilled men, and I'd trust you beside me over any of them. You've already proved you can handle whatever comes. I'm not looking to protect you from the world. I'm looking to face the world with you. Good, because I don't need a husband who thinks he has to save me. The word hung between them. Husband. She'd said it almost casually, but they both felt its weight. Is that what I am? Flynn asked quietly. Or what I'm going to be? I don't know yet. We've got time to figure that out. But her hand found his in the darkness, and she laced their fingers together. Though I'm not opposed to the idea, eventually, when we're ready. When you're ready, you mean. When we're ready, she corrected firmly. This isn't just about me, Flynn. You've spent years moving from place to place, never settling. That's a hard habit to break. I need to know you won't wake up one morning feeling trapped, wanting to run. I won't. You can't know that. Yes, I can. He turned to face her fully. Tabitha, I'm 33 years old. I've been a lot of places and known a lot of people. And I've never, not once, felt what I feel when I'm with you. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Like I'm home. His voice roughened slightly. I spent years looking for something without knowing what it was. Turned out it was you. A stubborn woman on a Montana ranch who'd rather face down armed men than admit she might need help. I did admit I needed help. I hired you, didn't I? Best decision you ever made. Second best, she corrected. Best decision was deciding to keep you. They reached the ranch on the afternoon of the fourth day, cresting the final ridge to see the homestead spread below them in the valley, the house, the barn, the corrals, all exactly as she'd left them, but somehow looking different now, more permanent, more like a future instead of just a survival. Caleb saw them coming and met them in the yard, Billy close behind. The old rancher's weathered face split into a rare smile as they dismounted. About damn time, he said. We were starting to think you'd decided to become city folk. Never, Tabitha said, hugging him briefly. How are things here? Good. Quiet mostly. Federal marshals came through like they promised, made sure everyone knew the ranch was under government protection. Haven't had any trouble. His eyes moved to Flynn. Heard you won. We did. Holloways are going to prison for a long time. Good. They had it coming. Caleb gestured toward the house. Come on. Billy and me kept things running, but it'll be good to have you back making decisions. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table with Caleb and Billy, Tabitha outlined what had happened in Helena, the trial, the verdict, the judge's order voiding all fraudulent loans. Her ranch was free and clear, owned outright with no debt to anyone. So what happens now? Billy asked. Things just go back to normal? Better than normal, Tabitha said. We can actually plan for the future instead of just surviving day to day. Expand the herd, maybe buy some of the land Holloway was forced to sell off. Build this place into what my father always dreamed it could be.
And speaking of building, Flynn said carefully, there's something we should discuss. The railroad's still coming through. Judge Morrison's orders stopped the fraud, but the route's already been surveyed and approved. Within a year, maybe two, there will be tracks running through this valley. Tabitha had been expecting this. Through my land?
Some of it, yes. But this time it'll be done legal. They'll have to negotiate fair price for the right of way, pay you properly, work around your operations as much as possible. He leaned forward. Could actually be good for the ranch. Railroad means easier shipping for cattle, supplies coming in faster, markets opening up. If we negotiate smart, Caleb added, don't let them push you around just because they're a big company. After what we've been through, I think I can handle railroad negotiations. Tabitha smiled slightly. Besides, I'll have a federal marshal around to make sure everything stays legal. About that, Flynn said, and she heard nervousness in his voice that hadn't been there even during the trial. I sent my formal request to the Bureau, asked for permanent assignment to the Helena office covering the Montana territory. He paused. They approved it. I'm officially based here now. Billy whooped. Caleb's smile was knowing. And Tabitha felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that had been building since Helena, but now felt solid and real. So you're staying, she said. If the position's still open, 30 a month and found, I believe were the terms. Position's open, though the terms might need renegotiating. She stood, suddenly needing to move, to do something with the energy coursing through her. Caleb, Billy, would you excuse us? Flynn and I need to discuss ranch business. Ranch business, Caleb repeated, his tone suggesting he knew exactly what kind of business they'd be discussing. Sure, come on, Billy. Let's check on that mare in the barn. When they were alone, Flynn stood and moved toward her. So, terms need renegotiating? Maybe. Depends on what you're offering. She was nervous suddenly, which was ridiculous. They'd already declared their feelings, already agreed he'd stay. But this felt different. This felt like making it real. I'm offering myself. All of me. The marshal work and the ranch work, the good days and the hard ones, the times I'm here and the times I'm not. He took her hands. I'm offering partnership, Tabitha. Not the kind where one person leads and the other follows, but the kind where we figure things out together. Where your ranch becomes our ranch, your dreams become our dreams. That's a lot to offer. I know, and I'm asking a lot in return. Asking you to accept that I'll be gone sometimes on marshal business. Asking you to share the life you've built and fought for. He took a breath, asking you to marry me when you're ready. Not because you need a husband, but because I want to be your husband. Want to stand beside you in front of God and everyone and promise I'll stay as long as you'll have me. Her heart was racing. That's not a negotiation, that's a proposal. I suppose it is. Not very romantic doing it in the kitchen. Should probably do it proper. Get down on one knee, have a ring, make a pretty speech. He smiled slightly. But we've never been very good at doing things proper, have we? No, she agreed, feeling tears prick her eyes. We've been better at doing things real. So what do you say? Will you marry me, Tabitha Wilson? Will you let me be not just someone who stays, but someone who's yours? She thought about her father, about his dreams for this ranch, and for her. About the months of fighting alone, proving she could handle anything. About the moment Flynn had ridden onto her property and asked for work, setting in motion everything that had followed. About sitting on the courthouse steps in Helena, his hand in hers, facing a future that had finally opened up. Yes, she said, and her voice was steady despite the tears. Yes, I'll marry you. But Flynn, I meant what I said. I don't need a husband. I don't need rescuing or protecting or someone to make decisions for me. I know. What I need is a partner. Someone who respects what I've built and wants to build more alongside me. Someone who will fight with me and for me, but never try to fight instead of me. She moved closer, looking up into those blue eyes that had seen so much but still held gentleness. Can you be that? Not just now when everything's new and exciting, but 10 years from now when ranch life is routine and the romance has worn off? The romance isn't going to wear off, he said firmly. And yes, I can be that. Will be that. Because Tabitha, I fell in love with exactly who you are, stubborn and strong and independent as hell. I'm not looking to change you. I'm looking to spend my life beside you, watching you be exactly who you're meant to be. She kissed him then, there in her father's kitchen with the lamp burning low and the Montana night settling around the ranch. Kissed him with all the fear and hope and love she'd been holding inside since the day he'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. So we're doing this. Getting married. We are. Though not immediately, we've got time to do it right. She smiled. Besides, I want to make sure you survive a full season of ranch work first. See if you still want to marry me after a winter of frozen water troughs and spring of pulling calves. I'll survive. I'm resilient. We'll see. They spent the next week settling into a new rhythm. Flynn divided his time between the ranch and Helena, handling marshal business, but always coming back within days. When he was home, he worked alongside Caleb and Billy with the easy competence he'd shown from the start. When he was gone, Tabitha ran things with the same fierce independence she'd always had, but without the crushing weight of doing it entirely alone. Letters arrived from Helena. Judge Morrison had sentenced the Holloways to 15 years in federal prison. Edmonds Bank had been taken over by new management, honest men appointed by the territorial government. The railroad had started negotiations with all the landowners along the route, offering fair prices and proper contracts. Martha Carson and her husband had bought back their old ranch and were rebuilding. Justice, it seemed, was actually possible. One evening in late summer, with the sun painting the mountains gold and the cattle grazing peacefully in the valley, Tabitha and Flynn sat on the porch together. She was going through the ranch books, accounts that finally showed profit instead of barely scraping by, while he cleaned his rifle and pretended not to watch her. "What?" she said without looking up. "Nothing. Just thinking." "About?" "About how this is where I want to be. Right here, right now, doing exactly this." She set down her pen and looked at him. He'd lost the gauntness of his early days at the ranch, filled out with regular meals and honest work. His hands were more calloused than when he'd arrived, his face more tanned. He looked like he belonged here, like he'd always been here. "Flynn Garrett, are you getting soft on me?" "Probably. Is that a problem?" "Not yet. Ask me again in 10 years. He smiled, that full smile that still had the power to make her heart skip. "In 10 years, I'll still be sitting on this porch with you, watching the sunset and counting myself lucky." Bold words. True words. He set aside the rifle and moved to sit beside her on the porch step, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I've been thinking about something. About what you said that first night I told you I loved you." "I said a lot of things." "You said you didn't need a husband. You'd proved that." He took her hand, turning it over to trace the calluses on her palm. "And you're right. You don't need a husband, don't need anyone. You've proved you can handle everything alone." But maybe it's not about need. Maybe it's about want, about choice." He looked at her directly. "I don't need you to survive, Tabitha, but I want you in my life. Want to share the good and the bad. Want to build something together that neither of us could build alone. Not because either of us is weak, but because together we're stronger." She thought about this, about the distinction between need and want, between dependence and partnership. All her life she'd been proving she didn't need anyone, that she was capable and strong and independent. But what Flynn was offering wasn't about need. It was about choice, about two whole people deciding to face life together instead of separately. "I want that too," she said quietly. "Want you? Want this? Want the future we're building." She squeezed his hand. "Though I still think we should wait until you've survived a winter before making it official." "Fair enough. But Tabitha?" He leaned in close, his voice low. "You should know I'm planning to make this a very convincing courtship. Going to show you exactly why marrying me is the best decision you'll ever make." "That's so. And how do you plan to do that?" "Wait and see. He proved to be a man of his word. Over the following months, Flynn courted her with a determination that was both amusing and touching. He brought her wildflowers from the high meadows when he returned from marshal business. He sat with her on the porch in the evenings, reading aloud from books he'd picked up in Helena. He learned to cook decent meals so she didn't always have to handle the kitchen after a full day of ranch work. He asked her opinion on everything and actually listened to her answers, treating her thoughts with the same respect he'd give any partner. And slowly, watching him fit himself into the life she'd built without trying to take it over or change it, Tabitha felt the last of her doubts dissolve. The proposal came on a cold October evening, almost exactly a year after her father's death. They'd spent the day moving cattle to winter pasture, hard work that left them both exhausted. After supper, Flynn suggested a ride up to the ridge where he'd first watched her ranch from a distance, back when he'd been deciding whether to introduce himself or just observe. "That seems like a lot of effort when we're both tired," Tabitha pointed out. "Humor me." So they saddled horses and rode through the twilight to the high point overlooking the valley. From here, they could see the entire ranch spread below, the house with smoke rising from the chimney, the barn and corrals, the cattle scattered across the grasslands, the creek winding silver through it all. "This is what I saw that first day," Flynn said, sitting his horse beside hers. "Saw the land, saw how it was laid out, saw the work that had gone into building it. But I didn't see you yet. Didn't know the woman who'd fought so hard to keep it. And now you do. Now I do. Now I know you're brave and strong and stubborn as hell. Now I know you can face down anything. Corrupt bankers, hired guns, federal trials, Montana winters." He dismounted and moved to stand beside her horse. "Now I know I want to spend the rest of my life watching you be exactly who you are." Tabitha's heart was racing as she dismounted to stand facing him. "Flynn? Wait, let me do this right." He knelt in the dirt, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I know you said you don't need a husband, but I'm asking anyway. Will you marry me, Tabitha Wilson? Will you let me stand beside you through whatever comes? Will you build a life with me here on this land you love, and let me love you the way you deserve to be loved?" She looked at the man kneeling before her, the federal marshal who'd risked everything for justice, the ranch hand who'd worked himself to exhaustion proving his worth, the partner who'd never once tried to diminish or control her. And she knew, with absolute certainty, what her answer was. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I need you, but because I choose you. Because I love you, Flynn Garrett. Because you've shown me that partnership doesn't mean giving up independence. It means finding someone worthy of sharing it with." He kissed her as the last light faded from the sky, and when he pulled back, he was smiling. "So we're doing this. We're doing this." She looked at the box he still held. "Is that a ring?" "Yes. Though, fair warning, it's not fancy. Marshall's salary doesn't run to diamonds." He opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small stone that caught the twilight. "But it's real, like us." She let him slide it onto her finger, feeling the unfamiliar weight of it. "It's perfect. You're perfect." "No, I'm not. I'm stubborn and difficult, and half the territory thinks I'm crazy for trying to run a ranch alone. The other half knows you're brilliant for succeeding at it." He pulled her close. "And you're not alone anymore. Not really. You've got Caleb and Billy, you've got Martha and the other ranchers who stood with you. And you've got me for as long as you'll have me. Forever, remember? You promised forever. So I did. Good thing I'm a man who keeps his promises." They rode back to the ranch as the stars came out, and when Caleb saw the ring on Tabitha's finger, his weathered face split into a grin. "About damn time," he said. "Was starting to think you two would dance around each other until spring." "We don't dance around anything," Tabitha protested. "The hell you don't. You've been looking at each other like lovesick calves for months." But his voice was warm with approval. "Your father would be happy, Miss Tabitha. Real happy." The words hit harder than expected. Tabitha had to blink against sudden tears. "You think so?" "I know so. He always said the right man would see you for who you really are. Not some woman who needed taming or protecting, but a partner worth standing beside. Flynn here sees that. Saw it from the start."
That night, lying in bed and looking at the ring catching moonlight through her window, Tabitha thought about her father, about his dreams for the ranch, and for her,
about how he'd raised her to be strong and independent, even knowing it would make her life harder in a world that preferred women quiet and compliant. About his last words, barely whispered through pneumonia's grip. Keep the land. Be happy. She was doing both now. The land was safe, thriving, hers, and happiness. That felt within reach for the first time since his death. Maybe before that. Maybe for the first time in her whole complicated, fighting life. They set the wedding for December, figuring winter was the quietest time on the ranch. Tabitha wanted it simple. Just close friends, no fuss, a celebration of what was real rather than what looked impressive. Flynn agreed immediately, saying he'd marry her in the barn if that's what she wanted. Let's aim slightly higher than the barn, she said, laughing. The church in Bitterroot is nice, a small ceremony, then a gathering back at the ranch. Whatever you want. What I want is for you to have opinions too. This is your wedding as much as mine. He considered this. All right, I want Reverend Matthews to officiate. He was kind to me when I first came to town, didn't ask too many questions. I want good food and music at the gathering after. And I want, he hesitated, then pushed forward, I want it to feel like a beginning, not an ending. Want people to see that we're starting something new together, not you giving up your independence or me getting what I want. I can work with that. Planning the wedding became a welcome distraction from the usual ranch work. Martha Carson insisted on helping, her way of thanking Tabitha for standing with her during the trial. Other ranchers' wives offered their support too. Women who'd watched Tabitha fight for her land and had been quietly impressed, even if they'd never said so out loud. You've changed things around here, one of them told Tabitha during a planning session. Shown it's possible for a woman to stand on her own. My daughter's been watching, asking questions about running ranches and handling business. Used to be she'd only hear about marriage and children, like that was the only path. There's nothing wrong with marriage and children, Tabitha pointed out. No, but there's also nothing wrong with doing things your own way. You've shown that. The woman smiled. And now you're showing you can have both, your independence and a partner. That's powerful. The words stayed with Tabitha as the wedding approached. She hadn't set out to be an example or to change anyone's mind about what women could do. She'd just been trying to survive, to honor her father's legacy, to keep what was hers. But maybe that was enough. Maybe living her truth was its own kind of revolution. Flynn spent the weeks before the wedding finishing touches on the house, repairs and improvements he'd been planning. He expanded the bedroom, built new shelves in the kitchen, reinforced the porch where they spent so many evenings. Caleb and Billy helped, and watching the three men work together, Tabitha felt gratitude wash over her. Her small ranch family was growing, becoming something stable and lasting. 2 weeks before the wedding, Flynn had to leave for marshal business, tracking fugitives who'd fled into the mountains after a bank robbery in Helena. He was apologetic about the timing, but Tabitha understood. This is part of who you are, she said as he prepared to leave. I knew that when I agreed to marry you. Go do your job. I'll be here when you get back. You better be. I've got a wedding to attend. He kissed her hard, then rode north with 2 other marshals. Tabitha watched him go with the familiar mixture of worry and confidence. Worry because his work was dangerous, confidence because he was good at what he did and always came back. The days passed slowly without him. She threw herself into wedding preparations and ranch work, keeping busy so she wouldn't count hours. But at night, alone in the house, she found herself touching the ring on her finger and thinking about the future, about what it would mean to be married, to share her life completely with someone else, about whether she was really ready for that level of partnership after so many years of fierce independence. Flynn returned 6 days later, tired and sporting a new bruise on his jaw, but grinning when he saw her in the yard. She ran to meet him, propriety be damned, and he caught her up in arms that were solid and real and home. Got them, he said simply. They're in custody in Helena, and I'm officially on leave for the next 2 weeks. Nothing's pulling me away from this wedding. Good, because I've got everything planned and I'd hate to have to postpone because you were chasing criminals. Your faith in my priorities is touching. I know your priorities. Justice and duty and doing what's right. She pulled back to look at him. That's part of why I love you, but I'm glad you're here now. Nowhere else I'd rather be. The wedding day dawned cold and clear, the kind of Montana winter morning where the sky was so blue it hurt to look at and frost turned everything silver. Tabitha woke early in her childhood bedroom, nervous energy making sleep impossible. Martha arrived at dawn to help her dress, along with two other ranchers' wives who'd become unlikely friends through the whole ordeal. The dress was simple ivory, practical enough to wear again for church or town visits. But it was new, and it was hers, and when she looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she looked happy. Genuinely, deeply happy, in a way she hadn't been since before her father died. "He's a lucky man," Martha said, adjusting Tabitha's hair. "But then, you're a lucky woman. Not everyone finds a partner who sees them clearly and loves them anyway." "Loves them because he sees them clearly," Tabitha corrected. "That's the difference." The church in Bitterroot was packed when they arrived. More people than Tabitha expected, ranchers and townspeople, and even some folks who'd come from Helena for the occasion. She walked down the aisle on Caleb's arm, the old rancher playing the father role with gruff pride. And at the front of the church, waiting beside Reverend Matthews, stood Flynn. He'd cleaned up well. Dark suit, white shirt, hair tamed and face shaved smooth. But it was his expression that stopped her heart. He was looking at her like she was the only person in the world, like this moment was everything he'd been waiting for. The ceremony was simple, traditional vows with a few personal additions, Flynn promising to always come home, Tabitha promising to always let him leave when duty called. Promises of partnership and respect and love that would weather whatever challenges came. And then the Reverend was pronouncing them married, Flynn was kissing her, and the church erupted in applause. "Mrs. Garrett," Flynn said against her lips. "Miss Wilson," she corrected with a smile. "Or Miss Wilson Garrett if you want to be formal." "I'm keeping my name." "Of course you are. Wouldn't expect anything else." The gathering at the ranch afterward was everything she'd hoped for. Food and music and dancing, neighbors celebrating not just a wedding, but the triumph of justice and the survival of one of their own. Tabitha danced with Flynn, with Caleb, with Billy, who was flushed with embarrassment but determined. She danced and laughed and felt light as air. As evening settled and guests began departing, Tabitha and Flynn stood on the porch watching the last wagons roll away. The ranch was quiet again, just the two of them and the land and the future stretching ahead. "So," Flynn said, pulling her close, "we're married." "We are. Having regrets yet?" "Not a single one." "You?" "Ask me again in 10 years. He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Still making me prove myself?" "Always. That's part of the deal." She turned to face him fully. "But Flynn, thank you for everything, for seeing me, for fighting beside me, for choosing to stay. Thank you for letting me, for trusting me, for loving me despite the badge and the secrets and the dangerous work." He kissed her gently. "I meant what I said in my vows. I'll always come home to you. I know, and I'll always be here, not waiting helplessly, but living and working and building. And when you come home, we'll build together." They stood together on the porch as stars emerged overhead, two people who'd found each other through chaos and chose each other in peace. The ranch spread around them in the darkness, her land, their land, the future they'd defended and would now shape together. Tabitha thought about her father's journal, about his last coherent words. Keep the land. Be happy. She'd done both, found a way to honor his legacy while building her own life, found a partner who made her stronger without making her less herself. "I love you," she said into the quiet. "I love you too." Flynn's arms tightened around her. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice when you let me stay." "You already have, but I'll let you keep proving it anyway." They went inside together, into the house that was now truly theirs, carrying with them the weight and wonder of promises made and kept. Outside, the Montana night settled over the Wilson Ranch, safe now, thriving now, home to a woman who'd refused to break, and a man who'd learned that staying could be braver than leaving. The fight was over, the future was beginning, and they would face it together, two people who didn't need each other but chose each other anyway, finding in that choice something stronger than either could have built alone. Winter settled over the ranch like a familiar blanket, bringing with it the quiet rhythm of married life.
Tabitha woke each morning to Flynn's warmth beside her, still sometimes startled by the reality of it, that she'd chosen this, that he'd stayed, that the future she'd fought so hard to secure was now unfolding exactly as it should. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and decisions with someone else. But it was an adjustment she found herself welcoming more than she'd expected. Flynn proved to be as good as his word about partnership. When he was at the ranch, he worked alongside Caleb and Billy with the same dedication he'd shown as a hired hand, never pulling rank or assuming authority. When ranch decisions needed making, he asked Tabitha's opinion and actually listened, treating her judgment with the respect it deserved. And when he had to leave for marshal business, he was honest about the dangers and the timeline, trusting her to handle things in his absence. "I'm heading to Butte tomorrow," he told her one February evening as they sat by the fire. "There's a case involving stolen mining equipment and possible murder. Could be gone a week, maybe 2. Tabitha looked up from the ledger she was reviewing. "Dangerous?" "Potentially. Mining towns can be rough, and if there's murder involved, someone's not going to want us digging into it." He moved to sit beside her. "I can request someone else take it if you need me here." "No, we're fine here. The cattle are settled, we're prepared for whatever weather comes, and Caleb's more than capable of handling anything unexpected." She closed the ledger and turned to face him fully. "This is your work, Flynn. Important work. I won't ask you to choose between duty and me. You're not asking, I'm offering. And I'm saying go. Do what you're meant to do. Just," she touched his face gently, "be careful. Come home." "Always." He kissed her palm. "You know, most wives would object to their husbands riding off into danger every few weeks. I'm not most wives, and you're not most husbands." She smiled slightly. "That's why this works." He left the next morning before dawn, and Tabitha stood on the porch watching him ride north toward Butte with that familiar mixture of worry and pride. The worry never got easier. Loving someone meant fearing for their safety, accepting that risk as part of the package. But the pride was steady and strong. Flynn was good at what he did, made the territory safer through his work, brought justice where it was needed. She wouldn't diminish that by asking him to be less than he was. The days without him fell into comfortable routine, morning chores, managing the herd, working with Billy on his horsemanship, keeping the books up to date. Caleb was teaching her some of the finer points of breeding decisions, preparing her for spring when they'd need to decide which bulls to keep and which cows to cull. It was the kind of knowledge her father had started passing on before his death, and having Caleb continue that education felt like honoring Thomas Wilson's legacy. "Your father would be proud of how you're running this place," Caleb said one afternoon as they inspected the breeding stock. "Not just keeping it going, but making it better." "I had good teachers." "You had the will to learn. That's rarer than you'd think." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "And he'd be proud of your choice in husband, too. Flynn's a good man, solid." "He is." Tabitha watched Billy working a young horse in the corral, the boy's confidence growing daily. "You ever think about settling down, Caleb? Finding someone?" The old rancher snorted. "At my age? Besides, I'm already settled. Been here longer than you've been alive. This ranch is as much my home as anywhere has ever been. I'm glad, because I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd manage, you always do." But his weathered face softened. "But I'm glad to be here. Glad to see this place thriving again after all the trouble. Glad to see you happy." Happy. That word kept coming up, and Tabitha found herself examining it like a strange new object. She'd been many things in her life, determined, angry, scared, stubborn, but happy? That had seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford during the dark months of fighting for survival. Now, with the ranch secure and Flynn in her life, happiness felt not just possible but present, woven through the daily work and quiet evenings and the future she was building. Flynn returned from Butte after 10 days, tired and sporting rope burns on his hands, but satisfied with the case's resolution. "Got the killer," he reported as Tabitha tended to his injuries. "Mining company foreman who'd been stealing equipment and killed a worker who threatened to report him. He'll hang for it." "Good." She wrapped clean bandages around his abraded palms. "These are going to hurt for a while." "I've had worse." He caught her hand as she finished. "Missed you." "Missed you too, But the ranch is still standing, so we managed. Never doubted it. He pulled her close, careful of his injured hands. You know what I thought about during those long, cold nights in Butte? What? How lucky I am. That I get to come home to this. To you, to the ranch, to a life that matters. His voice was quiet. I've spent years riding from case to case, sleeping in cheap hotels, never having a place that felt like mine. And now I do. Now I have you. She kissed him gently. And I have you. Someone who stays, even when duty calls him away. Someone who comes back. The seasons turned as they always did, winter giving way to the hard work of spring. Calving season was brutal. Cold nights, checking the herd, pulling difficult births, nursing weak calves through their first days. Flynn worked as hard as anyone, learning the ranching skills his martial work had never required, earning Caleb's grudging respect and Billy's open admiration. You're getting pretty good at this ranch husband thing, Tabitha told him one exhausted dawn after they'd spent half the night delivering twins from a struggling heifer. I'm motivated. He was covered in blood and birth fluids, but grinning. Besides, I like working with my hands. Makes martial work feel clean by comparison. That's because martial work is clean. You shoot people from a distance. This is getting right in there with life and death. I like this better, more honest somehow. Spring brought other changes too. The railroad began construction on the route through the valley, and true to Judge Morrison's orders, they negotiated fairly with all the landowners.
Tabitha drove a hard bargain for the right-of-way across her property, securing not just good payment, but guarantees about fencing and cattle guards and access roads. Flynn sat beside her during the negotiations, his presence a quiet reminder that she had federal backing if the railroad tried anything underhanded. You're a terrifying negotiator, one of the railroad executives told her when they'd finalized the deal. I feel like I just got taken apart and put back together. You got a fair deal, Tabitha corrected. That's not the same as being taken advantage of. Learn the difference. The money from the railroad right-of-way allowed for long-planned improvements. They expanded the barn, built a proper bunkhouse so Caleb and Billy had more space, and purchased additional breeding stock. The Wilson Ranch was not just surviving but thriving, growing into the vision Thomas Wilson had held when he'd first claimed this land. In May, Martha Carson came to visit, bringing news from the valley's other ranchers. We're forming an association, she explained over coffee in Tabitha's kitchen. All of us who were targeted by the Holloways, plus others who are tired of powerful men thinking they can do whatever they want. We're going to pool resources, share information, make sure no one else gets pushed around the way we were. That's smart, Flynn said. Safety in numbers. We'd like you to be part of it, Martha said to Tabitha. In fact, we'd like you to lead it. You're the one who stood up first, who fought hardest. People respect that. Tabitha felt something warm settle in her chest. Respect. Community. Belonging. I'd be honored. The association met monthly, and Tabitha found herself becoming not just a rancher, but a leader in the valley's agricultural community. She shared what she'd learned about negotiating with the railroad, about managing finances, about standing firm against pressure. Other women started attending the meetings, asking questions, learning. The landscape was changing, slowly but surely, and she was part of that change. Summer brought a new challenge in the form of a letter from the territorial government. They wanted to establish a formal land office in Bitterroot with proper surveys and updated records. They were looking for local advisors who understood the valley's geography and ownership history. They want you, Flynn said, reading over her shoulder. Says here they specifically need someone with recent experience dealing with land fraud and railroad negotiations. I'm not a lawyer or a surveyor. No, but you're honest and you know this land. That's worth more than credentials. He set down the letter. It's your choice, but I think you'd be good at it, and it would help prevent future fraud. She thought about it for several days before deciding to accept. The position would require 1 week per month in Bitterroot, working with surveyors and lawyers to establish proper records. It meant time away from the ranch, but with Caleb and Billy handling daily operations and Flynn home between martial cases, they could manage. You're taking on a lot, Flynn observed as she drafted her acceptance letter. Ranch, association leadership, now this government work. Says the man who's a federal marshal and a ranch hand. Fair point. He smiled. But seriously, you don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore, Tabitha. You've already proved everything that matters. This isn't about proving anything. It's about using what I learned to help others, about making sure what happened to my father and Martha and the others doesn't happen again. She sealed the letter. Besides, I like staying busy. Gives me less time to worry when you're off chasing criminals. He laughed and pulled her close. Whatever you want to take on, I'm behind you. Just promise me you won't work yourself to death trying to save the whole territory. I'll try to limit myself to just this valley. Fall came with its usual rush of work, roundup, sorting cattle for market, preparing for winter. But this year felt different. The ranch was stable, their marriage was solid, and the future seemed less like something to survive and more like something to build. Tabitha found herself thinking about next year, about 5 years from now, about the kind of legacy she wanted to leave. One evening in October, exactly 2 years after her father's death, she and Flynn rode up to the family cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. Thomas Wilson's grave was well tended, the headstone solid granite that would last generations. Tabitha knelt beside it, touching the carved letters of his name. I did it, Papa, she said quietly. Kept the land like you asked. Made it better, even. And I found someone worth sharing it with. She felt Flynn's hand on her shoulder, warm and steady. You would have liked him. He's stubborn like you, honest like you. He works hard and fights for what's right, and he loves me exactly as I am, which I think is what you always wanted for me. Flynn knelt beside her. Mr. Wilson, I want you to know I'm taking good care of your daughter, though truth be told, she doesn't need much taking care of. She's the strongest person I've ever met. His voice was rough with emotion. I promise I'll honor the life you built and the legacy you left, and I'll make sure this ranch stays in family hands for generations. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Finally, Tabitha stood and took Flynn's hand. Thank you for coming up here with me. Thank you for bringing me, for making me part of the family. He squeezed her hand. You know what today is? The anniversary of my father's death. Also the anniversary of when I first decided to stay. When I realized this place and you were worth more than just another case. He turned to face her fully. 2 years ago, I was just doing a job. Now I have a home. That's because of you. It's because of us, she corrected, because we chose each other. Winter that year was harsh, testing every preparation they'd made. Blizzards swept down from the mountains, temperatures plunged below zero, and keeping the cattle alive required constant vigilance. But the ranch weathered it, and so did their marriage. If anything, the shared hardship brought them closer, the quiet competence of two people working together toward common goals. Flynn was home more that winter, his martial cases limited by weather that made travel dangerous. He threw himself into ranch work with renewed energy, and Tabitha watched him transform from someone who'd learned ranching into someone who lived it. He talked about cattle breeding with Caleb, discussed land management with Billy, planned improvements with her in the evenings. He was no longer just a marshal who helped on a ranch. He was a rancher who sometimes did marshal work. You've changed, she told him one February night as they lay in bed listening to wind howl outside. How so? You're more settled. More here, if that makes sense. Like you've finally stopped being ready to leave. He was quiet for a moment. You're right. Took me a while to realize it, but this isn't just where I live between cases. This is home. The ranch is home. Your home. Everything else is just work I do before coming back to what matters. Think you'll ever want to stop the martial work entirely? Focus just on ranching? Maybe someday, but not yet. I'm still good at what I do, and there's still need for it. He rolled to face her. Does it bother you that I'm gone sometimes? It did at first, but I've learned to live with it. And honestly, she smiled in the darkness, I think we work better this way. You get to do work that matters. I get time to focus on the ranch without feeling like I'm neglecting you. And when you come home, we appreciate each other more. Most couples want to be together all the time. We're not most couples. No, he agreed, pulling her close. We're definitely not. Spring brought news from Helena. Edmund Holloway had died in prison, his health broken by incarceration and his empire destroyed. Jasper would serve out his full sentence, unlikely to ever hold power again. It should have felt like victory, but instead Tabitha felt mostly tired. So much pain and destruction, and for what? Greed and pride and the arrogant belief that money made you untouchable. "You okay?" Flynn asked when the letter arrived. "I will be. It's just all those lives ruined, including theirs. My father might still be alive if they'd been honest businessmen instead of criminals." She set down the letter. "But at least it's truly over now. No chance of them getting out early or causing more trouble." "It's over," Flynn agreed. "And the systems you've helped put in place, the land office, the Ranchers Association, the stronger oversight, all of that means it's less likely to happen again. Until the next greedy man decides he's above the law." "Then we'll fight that one too, together." He kissed her forehead. "But for now, let's focus on what we've built, on the good that came from the hard times." That summer, 3 years after Flynn first rode onto the ranch, Tabitha realized she was pregnant. The discovery came with mixed emotions: joy at the idea of a child, fear of the risks, worry about how it would change everything they'd built. She told Flynn on a warm June evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, not knowing how else to say it. Flynn went very still. Then a smile spread across his face, slow and wondering. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. 2 months along, I think. I wasn't sure how to tell you." "Why? This is wonderful." He pulled her into his arms, careful now in a way he hadn't been before. "We're having a baby. We're going to be parents. Are you ready for that? It changes everything." "Good. I like how things change with you." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "But what about you? Are you ready? I know you've got the ranch and the land office and the association. I'll manage. Women have been having babies and running their lives forever. I won't stop being me just because there's a child." But her voice was uncertain. "Though I admit I'm scared. My mother died when I was 12. Childbirth is dangerous. We'll get the best doctor. We'll be careful. And Tabitha," he took her face in his hands, "you're the strongest person I know. If anyone can handle this, it's you." The pregnancy progressed through summer and fall, and Tabitha found herself having to adjust her work as her body changed. She couldn't ride as hard or lift as much, had to delegate more to Caleb and Billy. It grated against her independent nature, but Flynn was gentle in his insistence that she take care of herself. "The ranch will survive if you slow down," he pointed out, "but we need you healthy." "I hate feeling weak." "You're not weak. You're growing a person. That's the opposite of weak." The baby came in January during a blizzard that trapped them all at the ranch. The doctor couldn't get through the snow, so it was Flynn and Martha Carson, summoned just before the storm hit, who delivered the baby. Tabitha labored through the night and into the morning, Flynn holding her hand and Martha coaching her through each contraction. When the baby finally arrived, a squalling red-faced boy with dark hair and strong lungs, Tabitha held him and felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of the world. This was her son, hers and Flynn's, a new generation to carry forward the legacy her father had built and she had defended. "He's perfect," Flynn said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Flynn looked at her, then at the baby. "Thomas. After your father, if that's all right with you." Tears blurred her vision. "Thomas Flynn Garrett. It's perfect." Little Thomas proved to be as stubborn as his mother and as determined as his father. He grew quickly, filling the house with noise and energy. Tabitha learned to balance motherhood with ranch work, often carrying the baby in a sling while she handled lighter chores, passing him to Caleb or Billy when she needed both hands free. It wasn't how things were traditionally done. Most ranch wives stayed in the house with children while men handled outdoor work. But nothing about her life had ever been traditional. "You're going to confuse that poor child," one of the neighbor women said, watching Tabitha carry 2-month-old Thomas out to check on the horses. "He won't know if his mother's a lady or a ranch hand." "He'll know his mother is both," Tabitha replied calmly, "and he'll grow up understanding that women can be whatever they choose to be." Flynn took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else. When he was home, he was fully present, changing diapers, walking the floor with a crying baby, singing off-key lullabies that somehow worked anyway. And when he had to leave for marshal work, He was honest about hating it. "I don't want to go," he said, before a trip to Helena when Thomas was 4 months old. "I want to stay here and watch him grow."
Then request a permanent assignment here. Full-time ranching, no more marshal work. He considered this seriously. "Would you want that? Me underfoot all the time?" "I want you happy. If marshal work makes you happy, keep doing it. If being here full-time would make you happier, then do that." She shifted Thomas to her other arm. "But Flynn, you don't have to choose right now. We've got time to figure it out." "You always say that we've got time." "Because we do. We're building a life, not racing towards some finish line." She kissed him gently. "Go to Helena. Do your job. Come home. We'll be here." The years unfolded in the steady rhythm of ranch life and family. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to boy, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly, following Caleb and Billy around with endless questions. Flynn continued his marshal work but requested assignments closer to home when possible, spending more time at the ranch than away from it. And Tabitha balanced motherhood with her various responsibilities, proving that a woman could be wife, mother, rancher, and community leader all at once. The Wilson Ranch prospered beyond her father's dreams. With good breeding stock, careful management, and the income from the railroad right-of-way, they expanded their holdings and improved their herd quality. Other ranchers came to them for advice, and the association Tabitha led became a model for cooperative agricultural organization. On Thomas's 5th birthday, they gathered the extended ranch family for a celebration. Caleb and Billy, Martha Carson and her husband, neighbors and friends from the valley. Watching her son blow out candles on a cake while Flynn's arm rested warm around her shoulders, Tabitha felt something close to contentment. "Happy?" Flynn murmured in her ear. "Very. You?" "More than I knew possible." He kissed her temple. "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me stay, for building this life with me, for giving me everything I didn't know I needed." That summer, Flynn made his decision. He turned in his marshal's badge, taking a position as a regional consultant, advising other lawmen, but no longer riding out on dangerous cases. His explanation was simple. "I've got a son who needs his father and a wife who deserves a husband who comes home every night. Marshal work was important, but this is more important." Tabitha understood it was the right choice for him, for them, for their family. And she felt a relief she hadn't known she was carrying, the constant low-level worry about his safety finally easing. With Flynn home full-time, the ranch thrived even more. They built a new house, larger than the old one, but still practical, designed for a working ranch family. They kept her father's original house as a guest space and office, preserving it as a reminder of where they'd come from. Thomas grew up surrounded by love and land and the stories of both his grandfathers, the man who'd built the ranch and the man who'd helped save it. When Thomas was 7, Tabitha took him up to the family cemetery on the hill. They stood before Thomas Wilson's grave, and she told her son about his grandfather, about his strength and vision, about the ranch he'd built and the values he'd lived by. "He sounds brave," Thomas said seriously. "He was. The bravest man I knew until I met your father." She knelt to be at eye level with her son. "Thomas, someday this ranch will be yours. Not because you're a boy or because that's how things are supposed to work, but because you'll have earned it through hard work and understanding what this land means. Your grandfather built it, I defended it, and your father and I have grown it. It's up to you to carry it forward." "What if I don't want to be a rancher?" The question surprised her, but she answered honestly. "Then you choose something else. The land will still be here, still be family land, but you get to decide what makes you happy just like I did." She smiled. "Though between you and me, I think you're going to love ranching. It's in your blood." "Like Grandpa?" "Like Grandpa, and like me, and like your father, even though he came to it later." She stood, taking his hand. "Come on, let's go home." They walked down the hill together, and Tabitha looked back once at her father's grave. She'd kept her promise to him, kept the land, made it prosper, built a life worth living, and she'd found happiness, the kind that came not from easy circumstances, but from fighting for what mattered and winning. The years continued their steady march. Thomas grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his mother and grandfather before him. More children came, a daughter they named Grace who proved to be even more stubborn than Tabitha,
and another son named James who had his father's quiet determination. The ranch expanded to become one of the most successful in the territory, known for quality cattle and ethical business practices. Flynn and Tabitha grew older together, their partnership deepening with time. They still had their disagreements, both were too strong-willed for perfect harmony, but they'd learned to fight fair and forgive quickly. They'd learned that love wasn't about never having problems, but about facing problems together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they stood on the porch of the big house, watching the sun set over land that had been through so much: threats and violence, trials and triumph, growth and change. Their children were inside arguing over something, their voices carrying through the open windows. Caleb had retired years ago, but still lived in a small house on the property, dispensing advice and stories to anyone who'd listen. Billy ran his own spread now, on land adjacent to theirs, married with children of his own. "You ever regret it?" Flynn asked, taking her hand. "Marrying me, tying yourself to someone instead of staying completely independent?" Tabitha thought about it seriously. "No, because you never made me less independent. You just gave me someone to be independent with, if that makes sense." "It does, because that's what you did for me too, gave me freedom within partnership, a home without a cage." He pulled her close. 20 years. Feels like both forever and no time at all. "Think we can make it another 20? At least. I've got plans." She laughed, the sound carrying across the ranch her father had built, that she had defended, that they had grown together. Always planning. "Always staying," he corrected. "That's what you asked for, remember? Not a husband, just someone who stays." And you have. Through everything, the hard times and the good, the busy seasons and the quiet ones. You stayed. Where else would I go? Everything I love is right here. They stood together as darkness settled over the Montana landscape, two people who'd found each other through chaos and built something lasting through choice and commitment and the daily work of partnership. The ranch spread around them, thriving and secure, home to family and legacy and the future they'd created together. Inside, their children's argument resolved into laughter. A horse whinnied from the barn. Wind rustled through the cottonwoods her father had planted 30 years ago. The ordinary sounds of a working ranch, a living family, a life well built. Tabitha leaned her head on Flynn's shoulder, feeling the solid reality of him beside her. She'd told him once that she didn't need a husband, and that had been true. But she'd chosen him anyway, and in that choice had found something richer than mere need. She'd found partnership. She'd found home. She'd found a man who understood that staying wasn't about being trapped, but about choosing every day to be exactly where you belonged. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being someone who stays." He kissed the top of her head, his arms warm around her. "Thank you for being someone worth staying for." They remained on the porch as the first stars appeared, watching the land they'd built their life on, holding each other against the coming night. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new joys. But tonight, in this moment, they had everything that mattered. The wind carried the scent of sage and grass, the eternal smell of Montana summer. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. The house behind them glowed with lamplight and life. And Flynn Garrett held Tabitha Wilson Garrett close, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something that would last long after they were gone. She didn't need a husband. She never had. But she'd chosen one anyway, and that choice had made all the difference. He'd asked to be someone who stays. She'd said yes. And 20 years later, he was still here, still working the land, still loving her, still choosing every single day to build a life together instead of alone. That was the promise that mattered, not the wedding vows or the legal papers or the children they'd raised. The promise that staying wasn't sacrifice but choice, that partnership wasn't weakness but strength, that love meant seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway. As the Montana night deepened around them and the ranch settled into peaceful quiet, Tabitha thought about the journey that had brought them here. From the desperate fight to keep her father's legacy to this moment of hard-won peace and joy. She'd proved she could survive alone, but she'd learned she could thrive together, and in the end, that was the real victory. Not independence or marriage, not land or justice, but the wisdom to know that sometimes the bravest choice was to let someone in. To trust. To build something with another person that neither could build alone. Flynn's hand tightened on hers, and she squeezed back, a silent conversation in the darkness. Still here, still choosing you, still home. The story that had begun with a woman defending her land alone ended here, with two people defending it together. The story that had started with desperate survival ended in thriving abundance. The story that had begun with suspicion and secrets ended in trust and truth. And as they finally went inside to join their children, closing the door on another Montana evening, the ranch stood strong around them, testament to courage and love and the power of choosing to stay.